Hello everyone. Welcome to Midnight Story Channel. I'm here to help you today. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, and I'm honored to be part of your journey. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and allow yourself to relax. Your story is about to begin. The first glint of surveillance I uncovered was embedded in the chandelier's crystal teardrop, winking like a malevolent star. The second lurked within the hollow socket of a porcelain doll's eye, its gaze unblinking and cold. By the time I stumbled upon the third, concealed behind a false panel in the guest bedroom's armoire, my heart was a drumbeat of dread, thundering with the certainty that I was ensnared in a web of unseen watchers. What was meant to be a simple evening of child minding had spiraled into a nightmare, and I was far from prepared for the horrors awaiting me. It was supposed to be a straightforward gig, a chance to pad my meager savings. When Mrs. Hawthorne approached me after the community book club, her silk scarf fluttering as she rested a manicured hand on my arm, I seized the opportunity. "We'll be out for just a few hours," she'd assured me, her lips curving in a smile that seemed to falter at the edges, never quite touching the cool depths of her eyes. "Little Clara is a dream tucked in by 7, and the house is yours to enjoy." I should have questioned the brittleness of that smile, but the promise of easy money clouded my judgment. Now, standing in the cavernous parlor of their opulent home, my pulse hammering against my ribs, I cursed my naivety. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the mournful chime of an ormolu clock on the mantel. Clara had drifted off without protest, just as her mother had promised, her golden curls splayed across a pillow embroidered with unicorns. I'd settled into a velvet-upholstered armchair, my laptop open to a half-finished essay, when a flicker caught my eye. Across the room, an antique silver mirror hung in an alcove, its surface etched with ivy motifs. A tiny amber light pulsed at its edge, faint as a firefly's glow. Curiosity, the treacherous spark, urged me forward. My reflection loomed larger with each step, my face pale and distorted in the mirror's aid glass. Then I saw it, a lens, no larger than a seed, nestled in the frame's filigree. My breath caught, a cold fist clenching my lungs. A camera. Someone was watching me, their gaze piercing through the veneer of this perfect home. Panic surged, a wild animal clawing at my chest. I began to search, my eyes darting to every shadowed nook. The more I looked, the more I found cameras tucked in the spines of leather-bound books, winking from the base of a Tiffany lamp, even hidden in the fronds of a fern cascading from a brass planter. My mind spun with questions. Were the Hawthornes spying on me, documenting my every move? Or was this the work of an intruder, someone who had infiltrated their sanctuary as easily as they'd welcomed me? I tore up the grand staircase, my sneakers skidding on the polished mahogany, desperate to ensure Clara's safety. Her room was a soft cocoon of pastel pinks, lit by the gentle glow of a carousel nightlight. I crept to her bedside, relief flooding me as I watched her small form rise and fall with each serene breath. But as I turned to leave, my gaze snagged on a stuffed rabbit perched on her dresser, its button eyes glinting in the dimness. One eye was wrong, too shiny, too perfect. I leaned closer, my stomach twisting. Another camera, its lens staring back like a predator's unblinking eye. Nausea roiled within me. I had to escape, to call for help. But my phone, I realized with a sickening lurch, was downstairs, abandoned on the rosewood coffee table. I descended the stairs with agonizing care, each creak of the ancient floorboards a gunshot in the silence. The house had transformed, its elegance now a facade masking a sinister intent. Every shadow seemed to pulse with hidden lenses, every corner a potential trap. In the parlor, my phone was no longer where I'd left it. Instead, it sat centered on the table, screen glowing as if placed there with deliberate care. I snatched it up, my fingers fumbling over the passcode. No signal. Of course. The Hawthorne Manor was infamous for its dead zones, a fact I'd laughed off when Mrs. Hawthorne mentioned it. I hurried to the dining room, where I'd noticed a vintage rotary phone mounted on the wall, its brass gleaming under the glow of a crystal sconce. But as I reached it, my heart plummeted. The phone was gone, replaced by a tangle of severed wires dangling from an empty mount. This was no longer just surveillance, someone was here, sabotaging my every attempt to escape. I sprinted to the front door, yanking at the ornate handle. Locked. I hadn't locked it, I was certain. My breath came in shallow gasps as I tried the windows, each one sealed as if welded shut. A sound from upstairs froze me in place, footsteps, measured and heavy, pacing across the floorboards. They were coming from Clara's room. Fear for the child overwhelmed my instinct to flee. I couldn't abandon her to whatever lurked in this house. I grabbed a silver candelabra from the sideboard, its weight a cold comfort in my grip, and began to climb the stairs. Each step was a battle against terror, the wood groaning beneath my weight. The footsteps above had ceased, replaced by a low, rhythmic murmur, like a lullaby sung in a stranger's tongue. I reached the landing, pressing myself against the damask wallpaper. Clara's door stood ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling into the hall. I edged closer, straining to hear. "That's it, Clara, you're doing so well," a voice cooed, deep and syrupy, unfamiliar yet chillingly calm. Just like we rehearsed. My blood turned to ice. What were they doing to her? I peered through the gap, and the sight before me stopped my heart. Clara sat on her bed, legs crossed, her eyes wide and glassy, staring into nothingness. Before her stood a figure I didn't recognize, a tall, gaunt man cloaked in dark fabric, his movements precise as a surgeon's. In his hands was a sleek device, its screen displaying multiple feeds: the parlor, the dining room, the hallway where I now crouched. He was watching everything. A gasp escaped me, betraying my presence. The man's head snapped toward the door, his eyes locking onto mine through the narrow opening. Time halted, the air thick with menace. Then he smiled, a grotesque, predatory grin that bared too many teeth. Well, he said, his voice a velvet blade, "our special guest has arrived. Won't you come in?" I didn't think. I ran, my feet pounding down the stairs, the candelabra clattering to the floor. His footsteps thundered behind me, relentless and gaining. I tore through the parlor, my socks slipping on the polished floor, and aimed for the kitchen. The back door was my only hope. I skidded across the tiles, my hands scrabbling at the knob. It turned miraculously, it turned. I burst into the garden, the night air sharp against my skin, the dew-soaked grass soaking my socks as I sprinted across the lawn. A high wrought iron fence loomed ahead, its spikes glinting under the stars. I heard the back door slam open behind me, his voice cutting through the darkness. "You can't outrun me," he called, his tone eerily composed. "This is my stage, and I know every act." I threw myself at the fence, my fingers clawing at the cold metal. Pain seared through my palms as I hauled myself up, my muscles screaming. His footsteps were closer now, a relentless drumbeat. I crested the fence and dropped to the other side, landing hard in a stranger's yard. I didn't stop. I ran through moonlit gardens, vaulting over low hedges, ducking beneath sagging clotheslines. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, but I pushed forward, driven by the need to escape, to save Clara. The neighborhood blurred past, its silent houses mocking my desperation. Why were there no lights, no signs of life? I reached the street's end, only to find it cut off by an abyss, an unnatural void where the road simply ceased, as if the world had been sliced away. I spun, searching for another path, but the darkness was closing in, swallowing the edges of reality. His footsteps echoed louder now, a harbinger of doom. "You see it now, don't you?" His voice boomed, omnipresent. "There's no way out." There never was. I collapsed to my knees, the wet grass seeping through my jeans. He emerged from the shadows, that vile smile still etched across his face. "Don't be afraid," he said, kneeling beside me, his breath cold against my ear. "You're going to be the star of the show." The last thing I saw was the red pulse of a camera, its light a silent witness to my unraveling. I jolted awake, gasping, my bedroom's familiar contours slowly coalescing in the dimness. A dream, just a vivid, soul-shattering dream. My heart still raced, a wild stallion in my chest. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, craving the anchor of reality. As the screen flared to life, a notification snagged my attention, a new email, sent mere seconds ago. With trembling hands, I opened it. No message, only an attachment, a video file. I pressed play, and my world crumbled. There I was, running through an endless maze of streets, terror carved into my features. And behind me, always behind me, was him. The camera's red light blinked, an eternal sentinel of my waking nightmare. The first rustle in the underbrush might have been a fox, darting through the twilight. The second could have been a wayward branch, snapped by the wind's careless hand. But the third, a low, deliberate murmur of voices weaving through the trees, told me with chilling certainty that I was not alone in the sprawling depths of Blackthorn Woods. Whatever secret I had stumbled upon, it was one I was never meant to uncover, and the price of my discovery was already being tallied in the darkness. I'd set out at first light, my rucksack heavy with provisions for a 4-day trek through the rugged wilderness of the Cascades. Blackthorn Woods was renowned for its pristine trails, a haven for solitary wanderers like me, promising solitude and the raw embrace of nature. The path was meant to be forgiving, marked clearly enough for even a novice to follow. But by midday, something had gone terribly wrong. Perhaps I'd misread the weathered map, or perhaps the trail itself had conspired against me. Either way, I found myself in a part of the forest that felt ancient, untamed, its trees gnarled and stooped, their branches knitting a canopy so dense it choked the sunlight to a feeble glow. The air was thick with the scent of moss and rot, and a stillness hung over the glade, as if the forest held its breath. As the hours bled into dusk, the realization settled like a stone in my gut: I was lost. The trail markers had vanished, replaced by an endless maze of roots and brambles. I should have stopped then, pitched my tent, and waited for dawn's clarity. But panic is a cruel master, driving me deeper into the labyrinth in a desperate bid for salvation. A ranger outpost, a stream, anything to anchor me to the world I knew. It was in this state of fraying nerves that I glimpsed a faint flicker through the trees, like the pulse of a distant lantern. A campfire, I thought, relief surging through me. Fellow hikers, perhaps, or a warden tending the wilds. Someone who could guide me back to safety. I pushed through a tangle of thorns, their barbs snagging at my jacket, and emerged into a clearing that stopped my heart. This was no ordinary campsite. A hulking canvas tent, military in its stark utility, dominated the space, surrounded by crates stacked in haphazard towers. Their contents were shrouded, but their purpose was unmistakable. This was a staging ground, a covert operation hidden in the heart of the wilderness. My breath hitched as I took in the details: tired tracks too broad for any recreational vehicle, gouged into the earth. A scatter of high-tech gear, its sleek surfaces glinting in the firelight. And, half concealed beneath a tarpaulin, a sight that turned my blood to ice: rifles, not the kind used for hunting deer, but weapons of war, their barrels gleaming with lethal intent. I should have fled then, melted back into the shadows and prayed the forest would swallow my tracks. But curiosity, that fatal flaw, rooted me to the spot. I crept closer, my boots silent on the carpet of pine needles, drawn to the tent's open flap. Inside, shadows flickered across the canvas, accompanied by the low hum of voices, their words muffled but urgent. I strained to decipher them, my heart pounding so fiercely I feared it would betray me. The forest seemed to close in, its silence now a conspirator in my peril. I was so focused on the tent that I nearly missed the other signs: the faint hum of a generator, the chemical tang of something unnatural in the air. My mind raced with possibilities: smugglers moving contraband through the wilds, mercenaries plotting in secrecy, or something darker still. Whatever it was, I had wandered into a hornet's nest, and the sting was coming. In my haste to retreat, I forgot to watch my step. My boot landed on a dry twig, and the crack echoed through the clearing like a thunderclap. The voices inside the tent fell silent, a predator's pause before the hunt. I heard the scrape of boots on dirt, the rustle of canvas. Panic seized me, and I dove behind a gnarled oak, pressing myself against its rough bark. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one a prayer that I'd remain unseen. "Check the perimeter," a gruff voice barked, sharp with authority. Could be a bear, but we don't take chances. Footsteps crunched through the leaves, spreading out in a methodical sweep. A beam of light sliced through the gloom, a flashlight's glare swinging back and forth. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to become part of the tree, invisible and silent. My pulse was a war drum, deafening in my ears. Clear over here, a second voice called too close for comfort. "Keep looking," the leader snapped. "If it's a ranger, we need to know now." I dared to peek, my eyes slitting open. Through the twilight, I counted 4 figures moving through the trees, their silhouettes bulky with gear. There could be more back at the camp, too many for me to outrun or outfight. I needed a way out, a plan to survive this reckless misstep. The forest seemed to conspire against me, every path cloaked in shadow, every sound a potential betrayal. Then I saw it: a narrow crevice between 2 moss-slicked boulders, half hidden by a fallen cedar. It was a desperate gamble, but it might be my only chance. I waited until the nearest searcher turned away, his flashlight beam sweeping the opposite direction. Then I moved, crouching low and scuttling across the open ground, my heart lodged in my throat. Just as I reached the boulders, a shout pierced the air. There! By the rocks! I didn't look back. I dove for the crevice, the stone scraping my sides as I forced myself through. It was tighter than I'd hoped, the walls closing in like a vice. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was trapped, my body wedged in the earth's unyielding grip. But with a final, frantic twist, I broke free, tumbling into a jagged ravine. I didn't pause to catch my breath. I ran, stumbling over loose shale and gnarled roots, the shouts of my pursuers echoing behind me. The ravine twisted and turned, a serpent's path through the wilderness. I followed it blindly, praying it wouldn't dead end, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, or was it my fear amplifying every snap and rustle? Just when I thought my strength would fail, the ravine opened into a broader trail, its surface packed and man-made. A hiking path, perhaps, or a service road. In the distance, I glimpsed a steady glow, not a flashlight, but the warm light of a building. A ranger station, a cabin. Salvation. I sprinted toward it, my boots pounding the earth, the frustrated curses of my pursuers fading as the trail confounded their chase. The light grew brighter, resolving into the shape of a log cabin, its windows spilling golden warmth into the night. I stumbled the final yards, my voice hoarse as I gasped, "Help! Please, you have to help me." A woman appeared at the door, her face weathered but kind, her eyes sharp with concern. She caught me as I nearly collapsed, her grip steady. "Easy, now," she said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "What's happened? Are you hurt?" Between heaving breaths, I poured out my story: the hidden camp, the weapons, the men hunting me through the dark. Her expression darkened, a storm cloud passing over her features. "Let's get you inside," she said, guiding me into the cabin's warmth. "I need to call this," and she handed me a thermos of water and moved to a radio on the counter, her voice crisp as she relayed the situation to the authorities. I sipped the water, my hands trembling, the adrenaline ebbing to reveal a bone-deep exhaustion. The scratches on my arms, the mud caking my boots, the terror still coiled in my gut, they were proof this was no hallucination. The woman returned, her face grim but resolute. "The sheriff's sending a team, but it'll take time to reach us out here. Tell me everything you saw, every detail, no matter how small." I nodded, taking a steadying breath as I recounted the night's horrors: the tent, the crates, the rifles, the voices plotting in the shadows. As I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever I'd uncovered in Blackthorn Woods, it was vast, a darkness that stretched beyond this single clearing. The forest, once a refuge, now harbored secrets I could never unsee. As the first rays of dawn pierced the cabin's windows, the distant hum of a helicopter broke the silence. Help was coming, bringing with it the promise of answers. The woman's eyes met mine, her gaze steady with determination. "You've done something brave, stumbling onto this," she said. "It's going to make a difference." I wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that my ill-fated hike would lead to justice. But as the chopper's roar grew louder, I couldn't shake the weight of the forest's gaze, its shadows whispering of dangers yet to come. Blackthorn Woods had marked me, and I knew I'd never walk its paths with the same innocence again. The metallic rasp that woke me from a fitful sleep was like a blade scraping against my nerves, a sound that didn't belong in the stale quiet of the dusk hollow inn. At first, I thought it was a remnant of a dream, a cruel echo of the road's endless hum still lingering in my mind. But when it came again, sharper and closer, followed by the muffled hiss of voices just beyond our door, I knew with a sinking dread that we were in grave danger. What was meant to be a brief respite from our cross-country journey had become a trap, and the walls of this decaying motel were closing in. It had been a grueling day on the road, the kind that left your eyes gritty and your thoughts sluggish. My partner, Lena, and I were driving from Chicago to Seattle, chasing a new job opportunity that promised a fresh start. The miles had blurred into a monotony of asphalt and cornfields, and by late evening, exhaustion had won out. We spotted the flickering neon sign of the Dusk Hollow Inn just off a desolate stretch of Route 47, its letters buzzing like dying insects. The place was a relic, its cedar siding warped and peeling, the parking lot a patchwork of cracked pavement and stubborn weeds. But it was cheap, and we were too weary to care about charm. The night clerk, a gaunt man with a sallow complexion and fingers stained yellow from years of chain smoking, barely glanced up from his tattered comic book as he slid the key across the counter. "Room 9, he muttered, his voice as thin as the motel's threadbare carpets. "Checkouts at 10. Lena managed a tired smile, her optimism undimmed despite the long drive. "It's just one night," she said as we trudged to our room, her voice bright with forced cheer. "We'll be back on the road by sunrise, ready for the next adventure." I nodded, too drained to argue, though the inn's desolate air clung to me like damp fog. Our room was a time capsule of faded dreams, musty air, avocado green wallpaper curling at the seams, and a double bed that sagged like a hammock. But the shower sputtered to life with lukewarm water, and the towels, though thin, were clean. After hours behind the wheel, it felt like a small mercy. We collapsed onto the bed, the springs groaning under our weight, and drifted into an uneasy sleep, lulled by the distant drone of a passing semi. The trouble began around 3 a.m. That scraping noise, metal on metal, like a crowbar testing a lock, jerked me awake, my heart lurching into a frantic rhythm. I lay still, straining to hear over the pounding in my ears. There it was again, unmistakable, followed by a hushed exchange of voices too low to discern but laced with urgency. I nudged Lena, pressing a finger to my lips as her eyes fluttered open, wide with confusion. She froze as the sounds grew clearer. Someone was outside, and they were trying to get in. We slid out of bed, our movements silent but frantic, the cold linoleum biting at our bare feet. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my stomach plummeting at the sight of the no service icon glowing mockingly on the screen. Lena whispered, her voice trembling, "Try the phone on the wall." I lifted the receiver of the ancient rotary phone bolted to the bedside table, its plastic heavy in my hand. Nothing, not even the faintest hum of a dial tone. We were cut off, isolated in this crumbling outpost. The scraping at the door intensified, now punctuated by a low curse, the sound of frustration mounting. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything we could use to defend ourselves. The lamp was too bulky, its cord tethered to the wall. The small television was bolted to the dresser, useless. Then I spotted the curtain rod above the window, a flimsy aluminum bar but better than nothing. I yanked it free with a quiet snap, its weight reassuring in my grip. Just as I turned back to Lena, a new sound froze us both, the unmistakable click of a key turning in the lock. Our eyes met, a silent pact forged in the dim glow of the room's single bulb. This was it. We had to be ready. The door swung open, revealing two shadowed figures, their outlines jagged against the sodium glow of the parking lot. In the hand of the taller one, something glinted, a tire iron, its curve catching the light like a crescent moon. Without thinking, I swung the curtain rod with all my strength. It connected with a dull thud, striking the shorter figure's shoulder. He grunted, stumbling. And Lena let out a startled cry, more shock than fear. We didn't wait to see the damage. Lena lunged for the open door, and I was right behind her, our bare feet slapping against the icy concrete of the motel's walkway. The night air was a sharp slap, cutting through our thin pajamas as we sprinted across the parking lot, gravel biting into our souls. We aimed for our car, its familiar shape a beacon of hope just yards away. But as we reached it, my heart sank. All four tires were slashed, their rubber splayed open like gaping wounds. We were stranded. The office, Lena gasped, already pivoting toward the neon sign flickering at the lot's edge. The clerk might have a phone. We ran, the sound of heavy boots pounding behind us, gaining with every stride. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw three men now, their faces shrouded in shadow but their movements predatory, purposeful. We burst into the office, the bell above the door jangling with a cheerful dissonance that mocked our panic. The clerk looked up, his comic book falling to the floor with a soft thud, his eyes narrowing as he took us in. "Please," I panted, my chest heaving, "you have to help us. There are men after us." They broke into our room, but as the words tumbled out, I saw his expression shift. Not to concern, not to alarm, but to something far worse, a slow, knowing smirk that curled his lips like smoke. Now, he said, his voice no longer bored but sharp with malice, "what's all this fuss about?" The door behind us opened, the bell chiming again like a funeral toll. Our pursuers filed in, blocking the exit, their silhouettes filling the cramped space. In the harsh fluorescent light, I could see them clearly now. The largest head of fresh welt blooming across his cheek where my curtain rod had struck, his eyes burning with fury. "Got ourselves some runners, eh?" the clerk said, stepping out from behind the counter. In his hand was a syringe, its needle glinting, filled with a clear liquid that promised oblivion. "You know I hate it when they run." Lena gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What do you want with us?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor I knew she felt. The clerk's chuckle was a hollow thing, devoid of warmth. "Want? Oh, darling, it's not about what we want. It's about what the market demands. Pretty things like you two? You'll fetch a fine price, believe me." The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't a robbery or a random act of violence. We were commodities, prey in a meticulously laid trap, our value measured in dollars and depravity. Lena tensed beside me, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. We had one chance, one fleeting moment to act. In perfect sync, we moved as one, charging the nearest man with the ferocity of cornered animals. The element of surprise was our only ally. Lena's elbow drove into his gut, forcing a wheeze from his lungs, while I aimed a wild kick at his shin, feeling the satisfying crunch of bone. He collapsed with a howl, and we were through the door before the others could react. The night swallowed us, the cold air a shock to our systems. But where could we go? Our car was useless, and the inn was a lone outpost in a sea of nothingness. "The woods," Lena whispered, her eyes darting to the dense tree line bordering the property. "We can lose them in there." I didn't argue. We plunged into the forest, branches clawing at our faces, roots snagging our feet. The underbrush tore at our legs, but we pressed on, driven by the sounds of pursuit shouts, crashing foliage, and the erratic sweep of flashlight beams cutting through the dark. We ran blindly, the forest a labyrinth of shadows. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent adrenaline spiking through my veins. Were they closing in? How long could we keep this up? My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but Lena's hand in mine anchored me, a lifeline in the chaos. Just as I thought we'd collapse, she pulled me to a stop. "Listen," she hissed, her breath ragged. At first, all I could hear was my own pulse, a frantic drumbeat. Then it reached me, the low, steady rumble of engines, the hum of civilization. A highway, perhaps, or a logging road. Hope flickered, fragile but fierce. We pushed forward, our pace slowing to a stumbling jog as exhaustion clawed at us. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but we couldn't trust the silence. Were they lurking, waiting for us to falter? The forest thinned, and the rumble grew louder, guiding us like a beacon. After what felt like an eternity, we broke through the tree line, the sight before us a miracle, a two-lane road, its asphalt gleaming under the moonlight, and in the distance, the headlights of an approaching vehicle, a logging truck, its engine a comforting growl. We waved our arms, probably looking like apparitions in our torn pajamas, our faces streaked with dirt and fear. The truck slowed, its driver peering out with wary concern. "You folks okay?" he called, his voice rough but kind. Lena shook her head, tears brimming. "No," she choked out. "We need help. Please." He nodded, unlocking the passenger door, and we climbed into the cab, the warmth of the heater a stark contrast to the night's chill. As the truck pulled away, carrying us toward the nearest town and the promise of safety, relief washed over me, tempered by a lingering dread. The clerk's words haunted me. How many others had fallen into their trap, lured by the promise of a cheap bed only to vanish into a nightmare? I glanced at Lena, saw the same resolve in her eyes that burned in my chest. We had escaped, yes, but this wasn't over. We had a duty now, to report what we'd seen, to ensure the Dusk Hollow Inn's horrors were exposed. Our journey had taken a detour into terror, but as the first light of dawn painted the horizon in shades of amber and rose, I knew our fight was just beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, but we would face it together, determined to bring light to the shadows that had nearly consumed us. The moment I handed over the keys to my battered Toyota Corolla, a shiver of unease rippled through me, as if I'd just tossed my fate to the wind. The man's fingers closed around them with a gleam in his eyes that wasn't just enthusiasm, it was something sharper, hungrier, like a wolf scenting blood. By the time he peeled out of the parking lot, the car vanishing into the dusk, I knew I'd made a catastrophic mistake. This wasn't just about losing a vehicle. I'd invited a predator into my life, and now he knew exactly where to find me. It had all started innocently enough, as these things often do. I was a junior at a small liberal arts college in Oregon, scraping by on a patchwork of scholarships and part-time barista shifts. The Corolla, a hand-me-down from my older brother, had been my lifeline, reliable despite its dense and rattling muffler. But with tuition deadlines looming and my savings account echoing with emptiness, I made the painful decision to sell it. Every cent counted, and I figured I could squeeze a few thousand out of the old beast. I posted an ad on a local online marketplace, complete with photos of its faded blue paint and a detailed rundown of its quirks. Within hours, a message pinged into my inbox from someone named Ethan. Ethan seemed like the ideal buyer. His texts were polite, peppered with just the right questions about the car's maintenance history and mileage. When we spoke on the phone, his voice was warm, almost disarming, with a casual charm that put me at ease. He sounded like someone's cool uncle, the kind who'd offer you a beer at a family barbecue. We arranged to meet at a bustling diner near campus, a public spot where I felt safe. I remember thinking how ordinary he looked when he strolled in mid-30s, clean-cut in a flannel shirt and jeans, his smile easy as he slid into the booth across from me. We chatted over greasy fries, and he asked about my major, environmental science, my plans after graduation, even my favorite hiking spots. Looking back, I should have noticed how deftly he steered the conversation, probing for details about my life. Did I live alone? Was my family nearby? At the time, it felt like harmless small talk, the kind you make to fill the silence. When we walked out to the car, parked under the diner's flickering neon sign, Ethan inspected it with a practiced eye. He popped the hood, ran his hand along the chassis, and even kicked the tires, his movements methodical but unhurried. Everything seemed above board. "Mind if I take it for a spin?" he asked, flashing that same easy grin. "Just a quick loop to see how she handles." I hesitated, a faint twinge in my gut warning me to hold back. But selling a car without a test drive was unheard of, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. "Sure," I said, handing over the keys. "Just stick to the block, okay?" Ethan's smile widened as he climbed into the driver's seat, the engine coughing to life with its familiar sputter. He gave me a mock salute through the window and pulled away, the taillights glowing red as he turned the corner. I stood in the parking lot, the evening chill seeping through my hoodie, waiting for the sound of the engine to loop back around. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. 5 minutes. 10. The diner's neon buzzed overhead, a mocking rhythm to my growing dread. By 15 minutes, my stomach was a knot of acid. Ethan wasn't coming back. I yanked out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text, then another, each one more desperate. No response. Panic clawed at me as I paced the lot, the other diners casting curious glances through the windows. That's when my phone buzzed with a new message from Ethan's number. "Thanks for the ride, kid. Better bolt your doors tonight." The words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. This wasn't just theft, it was a threat, a promise of something worse to come. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. The officer who took my statement was kind but pragmatic, her pen scratching across a notepad as she jotted down Ethan's description and the car's details. "We'll put out a bolo," she said, "but without a GPS tracker, it's a needle in a haystack. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" I nodded numbly, though the idea of leaving my apartment felt like surrender. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I'd be damned if I let some con artist drive me out. Back at my cramped studio, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the knob, a flimsy barrier against the fear gnawing at my insides. Every sound, the creak of the radiator, the hum of the fridge, became a potential intruder. Sleep was a lost cause. I sat on the sagging couch, clutching a kitchen knife, my eyes darting to the window every few seconds. Around 4 a.m., a low rumble broke the silence, a sound I knew too well, the Corolla's engine, idling just outside. I crept to the window, peering through the blinds. There it was, parked at the curb, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist. A figure sat in the driver's seat, face obscured by a baseball cap, motionless but unmistakably watching. My heart hammered, a caged bird desperate to escape. Was it Ethan, taunting me? Or someone else, sent to make good on his threat? I debated calling the police again, but what could they do in the minutes it would take them to arrive? The figure revved the engine, the sound a deliberate provocation, then sped off into the night, leaving me trembling in the dark. I sank to the floor, the knife clattering from my hand, and fought the urge to sob. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next day was a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. I called out sick from my shift at the coffee shop, unable to focus on anything but the specter of Ethan's message. "Better bolt your doors tonight." As I brewed my third pot of coffee, my phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another text from his number. "Missed me? Don't worry, I'm never far. Sleep tight." The words were a blade, slicing through what little composure I had left. I couldn't live like this, jumping at every shadow, waiting for the next move in his twisted game. I needed to fight back. I spent the afternoon preparing, channeling my fear into action. I scrounged an old softball bat from the closet, its grip worn but solid. I rigged makeshift alarms, empty soda cans balanced on the windowsills, ready to clatter at the slightest disturbance. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of control, a way to claw back the agency Ethan had stolen. As night fell, I positioned myself in the corner of the living room, the bat across my lap, the apartment dark save for the faint glow of my phone. The hours crawled by, each passing car a jolt to my frayed nerves. Just past midnight, the rumble returned, slower this time, deliberate. The Corolla's headlights swept across the blinds, casting slatted shadows on the wall. The engine cut off, and silence descended, heavy and oppressive. Then came the footsteps, measured, confident, approaching the door. The knob rattled once, twice, testing the lock. I gripped the bat, my palms slick with sweat, every muscle coiled for action. For a long moment, nothing happened. Had he given up? The answer came in a crash of glass. The window by the fire escape shattering inward. I didn't think I acted. A dark figure climbed through, his silhouette hulking in the moonlight. I swung the bat with all my might, the impact reverberating up my arms as it connected with his side. He grunted, stumbling, and I swung again, catching him across the back. He went down, cursing through gritted teeth. I fumbled for the light switch, the bat still raised, ready to strike again. In the sudden glare, I got my first clear look at my attacker. It wasn't Ethan. This man was older, his face weathered and pockmarked, a scar tracing the edge of his jaw. He glared up at me, pain and rage twisting his features. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking despite my resolve. He spat on the floor, a red smear against the linoleum. "Doesn't matter," he rasped. "Your pal Ethan owed me big. Said the car was mine to square his debt. Thought I'd see what else you had worth taking." The truth landed like a blow. Ethan hadn't just stolen my car, he'd used it as currency, handing me over to this thug to settle his own score. I was collateral damage in a game I hadn't known I was playing. The wail of sirens cut through the night, a neighbor's call to the police shattering the standoff. As red and blue lights flashed through the broken window, relief flooded me, though it was tinged with the bitter taste of violation. The man was cuffed and hauled away, his curses fading as the patrol car pulled out. The police found my Corolla a few days later, abandoned in a strip mall lot, its interior reeking of cigarette smoke. I sold it to a junkyard for scrap, the money going toward a deadbolt and a cheap security camera. Some might call it overkill, but to me, it was a lifeline. Weeks passed, and the sharp edges of fear began to dull. Life resumed its rhythm: classes, shifts at the coffee shop, late-night study sessions. But something had shifted in me. I flinched at unfamiliar faces, double-checked locks before bed, and avoided the diner where I'd met Ethan. The trust I'd once extended so freely had been fractured, replaced by a wariness that felt both foreign and necessary. One evening, as I locked up the shop, I saw a man leaning against a pickup truck across the street, his silhouette eerily familiar. For a moment, panic surged, but as he turned, I recognized him: a classmate, not a threat. He waved, oblivious to my racing heart. That night, I sat on my couch, the bed within reach, and stared at the new lock on my door. The world felt different now, its shadows deeper, its promises less certain. But I was still here, still fighting. Ethan had tried to break me, to turn my life into a pawn in his schemes. Instead, he'd made me sharper, more resilient. The road ahead was uncertain, but I'd face it on my terms, with eyes wide open and a grip on the bat that never quite loosened. The first smear of crimson on the linoleum should have been my signal to bolt, a stark warning painted in the flickering light of the kitchen. Instead, I stood rooted, my breath shallow, as the old woman's gentle smile twisted into something feral, her eyes glinting with a hunger that was anything but human. In that heartbeat, I realized I hadn't found refuge from the storm. I'd stumbled into a slaughterhouse, and the predators within were already sharpening their blades. It had begun as a reckless swim, a solo drive across the Midwest to shake off the jagged edges of a recent breakup. Just me, my creaking Ford hatchback, and the open road, stretching out like a promise of freedom. I'd been cruising through Iowa, the rain hammering my windshield with relentless fury, when the engine began to falter, a guttural rattle that grew into a death knell. I was miles from the last gas station, stranded on a desolate county road flanked by endless fields of sodden corn. The car shuddered once, twice, then died completely, leaving me cocooned in silence save for the drumbeat of the storm. I sat there, the rain's rhythm a mocking counterpoint to my racing thoughts. My phone was useless, its screen mocking me with a no-signal warning. The last road sign I'd passed had pointed to a town 10 miles back, too far to walk in this deluge. With a resigned sigh, I pulled on my raincoat, its hood flapping uselessly against the wind, and stepped into the downpour. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, barely piercing the sheets of rain. A house, its silhouette weathered but sturdy, nestled among a copse of gnarled oaks. Salvation, or so I thought. The trek was a misery of mud and cold, my boots sinking into the saturated earth with every step. As I drew closer, the house revealed itself: a rambling farmhouse, its clapboard siding chipped and gray, but its windows aglow with inviting warmth. Flower boxes line the porch, their blooms defiant against the storm, and a wrought iron weather vane creaked atop the roof. I hesitated at the porch steps, the late hour nearly midnight gnawing at my resolve. Would they welcome a stranger in this weather? But desperation overrode courtesy, and I climbed the steps, my knuckles poised to knock. Before I could make contact, the door swung open, revealing an elderly woman, her face a map of wrinkles framed by a halo of silver hair. Her smile was as warm as the light spilling from within, her eyes twinkling with a grandmotherly kindness. "Goodness me," she said, her voice soft as a lullaby, caught in this tempest. "Are you? Come in, child, before you catch your death." Relief washed over me, heavy as the rain soaking my clothes. I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me, and the storm's roar faded to a distant murmur. The house was a shrine to a bygone era, doilies on every surface, sepia photographs crowding the walls, and furniture worn soft by decades of use. "I'm so sorry to intrude," I began, dripping onto a braided rug. "My car broke down a ways back, and I was hoping to use your phone." The woman waved off my apology with a delicate hand. "Nonsense, no trouble at all. I'm Eleanor, and that's my husband, George." She gestured to an older man emerging from what I assumed was the kitchen, his flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, his smile mirroring hers. "I'm Riley," I said, shaking off the chill. "Thank you for this." Eleanor clucked sympathetically. "Oh, dear, a broken car in this weather? Our phone's out. I'm afraid the storm's been wreaking havoc. But you're welcome to stay until it passes. George, fetch some dry clothes while I put the kettle on." Before I could protest, I was seated at a scarred oak table in their kitchen, wrapped in a quilted robe that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. My hands curled around a steaming mug of chamomile tea, its warmth seeping into my bones. Eleanor bustled about, insisting I eat a slice of her homemade cornbread, while George spun tales of the farm's history, tales of bountiful harvests and long-ago neighbors. Their kindness was a balm, a flicker of comfort after weeks of heartache. But as the night wore on, subtle cracks began to appear in their hospitality. Eleanor's smile faltered when she thought I wasn't watching, slipping into something cold and calculating. George's stories grew vague, his eyes avoiding mine as he spoke. And there was something else, a faint, metallic tang beneath the kitchen's cozy sense of bread and herbs, a smell that clung to the back of my throat like a warning. I tried to dismiss it, blaming my frayed nerves, but it lingered, insidious and growing. When I excused myself to use the bathroom, the smell intensified, a coppery edge that set my teeth on edge. I navigated the narrow hallway, its walls lined with faded wallpaper, and found the bathroom a small, tidy space with a clawfoot tub. But as I returned to the kitchen, my eyes caught on something in the dim light, a single drop of blood, stark against the linoleum's worn pattern. I froze, my mind struggling to process it. Was it a spill, a cut from cooking? But the drop was too perfect, too deliberate, like a signature. George was alone in the kitchen now, scrubbing a plate at the sink, his back to me. "Eleanor's gone to fix up the spare room," he said without turning, his voice oddly flat. I nodded, my gaze locked on the blood. It seemed to pulse in the fluorescent light, a beacon of wrongness. Then I saw another drop, smaller, near the table's edge. My heart began to race, a primal alarm sounding in my core. George must have sensed my stillness. He turned, his eyes following mine to the floor. For a moment, we were statues, the air thick with unspoken menace. Then, slowly, he set down the plate, his movements deliberate. "Well, now," he said, his voice stripped of its earlier warmth. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice that." I looked up, and the kindly old man was gone, replaced by a stranger with eyes like flint, cold and unyielding. "What's happening here?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. George sighed, reaching behind him. "It's not personal, Riley. Eleanor and I, we have needs. And visitors are so rare out here." His hand emerged, clutching a butcher's knife, its blade gleaming with a wicked sheen. My blood turned to ice, my body screaming to move. "You don't have to do this," I said, backing toward the hallway. "I'll leave now. I won't say a word, I swear." George's chuckle was a dry, humorless rasp. "Oh, it's far too late for that. We've made our choice, and you're part of it now, whether you like it or not." I bolted, aiming for the front door, my socks slipping on the polished wood. But George was faster than his age suggested, his wiry frame closing the distance with alarming speed. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Eleanor!" he bellowed. "Our guest is getting antsy." Footsteps thundered from the stairs, and Eleanor appeared, her face no longer soft but sharp, predatory. In her hand was a syringe, its needle glinting, filled with a liquid that promised darkness. I fought with everything I had, thrashing and clawing, my nails raking across George's cheek. He cursed, his grip loosening just enough for me to twist free. Eleanor lunged, the syringe aimed at my neck, but I swung wildly, my elbow catching her in the ribs. She stumbled, the syringe skittering across the floor, and I seized the moment, sprinting for the kitchen. There had to be a back door, a way out of this nightmare. I found it, a weathered door beside the pantry, its lock stiff but yielding under my desperate hands. I burst into the storm-soaked night, the rain a cold shock against my skin. The yard was a quagmire, my feet sinking into the mud as I ran, the robe flapping like a useless sail. Behind me, their voices carried on the wind, sharp with anger. I headed for the barn, its looming silhouette a gamble. Maybe I could hide, find a weapon, anything to buy time. The barn door groaned as I shoved it open, the sound swallowed by the storm. Inside, darkness enveloped me, thick and suffocating. I fumbled forward, my hands outstretched, until my foot struck something solid. I fell, landing in a warm, sticky pool that reeked of copper. The smell from the kitchen hit me full force, and I choked back a scream as my eyes adjusted to the gloom. Shapes emerged, hooks dangling from the rafters, tables fitted with leather straps, and worse, far worse, piles of what could only be human remains, neatly sectioned, their surfaces glistening in the faint moonlight. This wasn't just murder. This was a butcher's workshop, a shrine to depravity. Bile surged in my throat, but I forced myself to my feet, my hands slick with blood. I had to get out, had to find help. But as I turned, the doorway filled with their silhouettes, George and Eleanor, their faces twisted with a mix of rage and disappointment. "Oh, Riley," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false pity, "you shouldn't have come in here. Now we have no choice." I backed away, my eyes scanning for anything to fight with. My hand closed around a cold, heavy object, a pitchfork, its tines rusted but sharp, propped against a bale of hay. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing it, my voice raw with fear. George laughed, a chilling sound that echoed off the barn's walls. "What? You'll kill us?" "Others have tried, child." They advanced, their movements synchronized, predators cornering their prey. But they had underestimated me. As they closed in, I charged, the pitchfork thrust forward like a lance. It sank into George's shoulder with a sickening crunch, his scream tearing through the night. Eleanor wailed, a sound of primal fury, and lunged at me, her nails clawing at my face. We grappled, tumbling to the blood-soaked floor, my hands scrabbling for anything to end this. My fingers found a hammer, its head caked with rust, and I swung blindly. It connected with a dull thud, and Eleanor went limp, her body slumping beside her husband's. I lay there, gasping, the storm's roar mingling with the pounding in my ears. The reality of what I'd done, what I'd survived, crashed over me like a wave. Slowly, I staggered to my feet, the rain now a faint drizzle, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. In the distance, a new sound broke through sirens, their wail a lifeline in the darkness. Someone must have heard the chaos, called for help. I stumbled out of the barn, collapsing in the muddy yard as police cars roared up the drive, their lights painting the night in frantic reds and blues. The officers swarmed around me, their questions a blur I couldn't answer. I was alive, but the horrors I'd seen in that barn, the hooks, the tables, the remains had carved themselves into my soul. As they led me to an ambulance, wrapping me in a blanket, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. The things I'd witnessed would haunt me forever, shadows that no light could banish. I had escaped the butcher's haven, but at what cost? The storm had passed, but the scars it left behind were only beginning to form. The safe wasn't supposed to be ajar. That was the first splinter in the illusion of my cushy house-sitting job, a crack that revealed the darkness lurking beneath the polished surface of the Laurelwood estate. As I stared at the bundles of cash and the cryptic ledger within, my pulse quickened, a drumbeat of dread that grew deafening when I heard the sharp click of a key turning in the front door. In that moment, I knew I'd stumbled into a hornet's nest, and the sting was coming for me. It had all begun with a stroke of luck, or so I thought. I was a senior at a small college in upstate New York, drowning in student loans and surviving on instant noodles and library coffee. When my sociology professor, Dr. Eleanor Carver, mentioned she and her husband needed a house sitter for a week while they attended a conference in Boston, I leapt at the chance. The Carvers lived in a sprawling Georgian mansion on the edge of town, its ivy-clad walls and manicured lawns a far cry from my moldy off-campus apartment. The promise of easy money and a taste of luxury was too tempting to resist. When I arrived, Mrs. Carver Lillian, as she insisted I call her, gave me a brisk tour, her heels clicking on the polished marble floors. She pointed out the orchids that needed misting, the state-of-the-art security system I was to arm each night, and the kitchen stocked with gourmet snacks. "One last thing, dear," she said, pausing outside a heavy oak door off the main hall. "The study is off limits. Private documents, you understand." Her smile was warm, but her eyes held a flicker of something sharp, like a blade catching the light. I nodded, barely registering her words, my mind already drifting to the heated pool and the 80-inch flat screen in the media room. The first few days were a dream. I lounged on the terrace, sipping artisanal lemonade from their fridge, and binge-watched documentaries on their surround sound system. The house was a labyrinth of opulence, crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, and bookshelves groaning with leather-bound tomes. It felt like a vacation, a brief escape from the grind of deadlines and debt. But by the fourth day, a restless itch began to gnaw at me. I'd always been too curious for my own good, a trait that had fueled my ambition to become an investigative reporter. The locked study door, with its carved panels and brass handle, whispered to me each time I passed, a siren's call I couldn't ignore. I told myself I was just checking for forgotten chores, maybe a fern needed watering, or a window had been left unlatched. It was a weak excuse, but it propelled me to try the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily, the door swinging open with a soft creak. The study was a monument to academia, mahogany shelves lined with journals, a globe inlaid with mother-of-pearl, and a massive desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. But what drew my eye was a portrait of the Carvers on the far wall, its gilt frame slightly askew. Behind it, I glimpsed the edge of a safe, its steel surface gleaming in the dim light. I knew I should leave, close the door, and pretend I'd never been there. But curiosity is a relentless beast. I crossed the room, my sneakers silent on the Aubusson rug, and nudged the portrait aside. The safe was open, just a hair, as if inviting me to peer inside. My heart thudded, a warning I ignored as I pulled the door wider. Inside were stacks of cash, bound with rubber bands, a leather-bound ledger with handwritten entries, and a USB drive, its surface unassuming yet ominous. I was still processing the sight when the front door's lock clicked, sharp and final, echoing through the house like a gunshot. Panic surged, a cold wave that locked my joints. Footsteps heavy, purposeful clacked across the foyer, accompanied by a man's voice, low and clipped. "Anyone here?" It called, not Dr. Carver's measured tenor but something rougher, unfamiliar. I scrambled to close the safe, my hands shaking as I realigned the portrait. The footsteps grew closer, a metronome of doom. I scanned the room, desperation clawing at me. The closet was too obvious, the window too high. In a blind panic, I dove under the desk, pulling the leather chair in to shield me, my breath shallow and ragged. The study door opened, and a pair of polished loafers stepped into view, their leather scuffed but expensive. "All clear," the man said, presumably into a phone, his voice taut with urgency. "Safe's untouched. Looks like the girl didn't poke around." Girl. They meant me. My blood ran cold, pooling in my chest like ice water. Another set of footsteps joined him, lighter, accompanied by the rustle of fabric. A woman. "Good," she replied, her tone crisp. "We can't afford some meddling co-ed screwing this up. Let's grab what we need and get out. The Carvers are back tomorrow, and everything needs to be in place." I held my breath, my body pressed against the desk's underside, the wood's grain biting into my palms. The safe's door creaked open again, followed by the soft shuffle of papers and the clink of coins. "This haul's the last piece," the woman said. "With this, we can push into 4 more cities. The boss will be thrilled." Cities? Haul? My mind reeled, piecing together fragments of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. This wasn't petty theft or academic fraud, this was organized crime, a network sprawling far beyond the Carver's pristine estate. "What about the kid?" the man asked, his voice closer now, as if he were leaning over the desk. I froze, my lungs burning. "Think she's onto anything?" The woman snorted, dismissive. "Doubt it. From what Lillian said, she's just some starry-eyed student, probably spent the week lounging by the pool and raiding the wine cellar. If only they knew." They continued, tossing out names and locations: Syracuse, Cleveland, a man called Viper. Details I tried to sear into my memory, my reporter's instincts kicking in despite the terror. After what felt like hours but was likely minutes, their footsteps retreated, the front door slamming shut with a finality that shook the house. I waited, counting to 100, then 200, until the hum of a car engine faded into the night. Only then did I crawl out, my legs cramped and trembling, my mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. What now? Call the police? But what if the Carvers were complicit, their academic veneer a mask for something sinister? I needed proof, something tangible to anchor my suspicions. With shaking hands, I returned to the safe, still slightly ajar. The cash and ledger remained, but I grabbed the USB drive, slipping it into my pocket like a live grenade. I snapped a photo of the safe's contents with my phone, the flash illuminating the stacks of bills and the ledger's scrawled numbers. As I closed the safe and straightened the portrait, a car's headlights swept across the windows, tires crunching on the gravel drive. My heart lurched. Someone else was here. I bolted from the study, barely shutting the door, and skidded into the living room just as the front door opened. Dr. and Mrs. Carver stepped inside, their faces etched with travel fatigue but brightening at the sight of me. "Nora!" Lillian exclaimed, setting down her suitcase. "We didn't expect you to still be here. How was everything?" I forced a smile, my lips trembling, praying my panic didn't bleed through. "Perfect," I managed, my voice too high. "No issues at all." "How was the conference?" They launched into a cheerful recap, oblivious to my turmoil, while the USB drive burned a hole in my pocket. Dr. Carver pressed an envelope into my hand. "A little bonus for your trouble," he said, his smile genial but his eyes searching. "Was it hush money? Did they know I'd seen something?" I mumbled my thanks, gathered my backpack, and headed for the door, my legs wobbling like a newborn foal. "Oh, Nora," Lillian called after me, her voice syrupy. "We might need a house sitter again next month. Interested?" I turned, meeting her gaze. Her smile was flawless, but her eyes held that same sharp glint I'd seen before, a predator sizing up its prey. "Absolutely," I heard myself say, the words automatic. "Just let me know." As I climbed into my beat-up hatchback and drove away, my mind was a storm of questions. What had I uncovered? What was I supposed to do with it? Back at my apartment, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and felt the walls closing in. I was exposed, a target in a game I didn't understand. With trembling hands, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop, my heart pounding as files loaded. What I found was a labyrinth of corruption, financial records detailing millions in untraceable transactions, shipping manifests for cargo labeled only as product, and lists of names, some chillingly familiar, local officials, a police captain, even a state senator. The Carvers, my kindly professor and his poised wife, were at the heart of a criminal empire, their mansion a nerve center for something vast and vile. I stayed up all night, scouring the files, my notebook filling with frantic scribbles. By dawn, I faced a choice: turn the evidence over to the authorities and pray they weren't compromised, bury my head in the sand and pretend I'd seen nothing, or dive deeper, using my journalistic skills to unravel the full scope of this conspiracy. As sunlight filtered through my blinds, casting long shadows across the room, I made my decision. I couldn't walk away. This was too big, too monstrous to ignore. I opened my laptop and began to write. Behind the ivy-clad walls of Laurelwood Estate, a darkness festers, hidden in plain sight. But one curious house-sitter, armed with a single USB drive, is about to drag those secrets into the light. I didn't know where this path would lead, or how many enemies I'd make along the way. But one thing was certain: my life had changed forever. What started as a week of poolside lounging had become the story of a lifetime, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The moment her hand grazed my wrist, a jolt of wrongness shot through me, her touch colder than the November night and her grip unnervingly strong. As I met her gaze, expecting gratitude but finding only a void, I realized with a sinking dread that this wasn't a stranded traveler I'd picked up on a whim. This was a snare, and I'd walked right into it, my van now a cage on a desolate highway. I'd been driving for hours, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from back-to-back delivery runs for a small courier service out of Boise. The rural stretches of Idaho's Highway 95 were my usual haunt, their endless blacktop and scattered road signs a familiar monotony. It was well past midnight, the world reduced to the glow of my headlights and the occasional flash of reflective eyes, deer, coyotes, the nocturnal denizens of the wild. These late-night routes were typically uneventful, a quiet grind that paid the bills. But tonight, the air felt heavier, charged with an unease I couldn't shake. I first spotted her about 5 miles back, a lone figure on the shoulder, arm outstretched in the universal plea for a ride. At first, I drove past, company policy ringing in my head. No passengers, no exceptions. But something made me ease off the gas. In my rear-view mirror, she looked so fragile young, maybe mid-20s, her dark hair whipping in the wind, her posture hunched against the cold. Her jacket was too thin for the biting chill, and she clutched herself as if trying to hold her warmth together. Guilt gnawed at me. What kind of person leaves someone stranded in the middle of nowhere? I pulled over, the van's tires crunching on gravel, and rolled down the passenger window. "You okay?" I called. "Need a lift?" She approached slowly, her face pale in the dashboard's glow, her smile tremulous but grateful. "Thank you," she said, her voice quivering. "My truck broke down a few miles back, and I've been walking forever. Can you take me to the next town?" I hesitated, my instincts prickling, but her vulnerability disarmed me. The next town, Clearwater, was a good 30 miles away, and the idea of leaving her out here felt cruel. "All right," I said, unlocking the door. "Hop in. I can get you to Clearwater." Her smile widened as she climbed in, settling into the seat with a shiver. "You're a lifesaver," she murmured, rubbing her hands together. I turned up the heater, the warm air hissing through the vents, and introduced myself. "I'm Casey," I said, trying to break the ice. "Jenna," she replied, her voice soft but steady now. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the road unspooling before us, flanked by dense pines that seemed to lean closer in the dark. I tried to make small talk, asking about her truck, but her answers were vague. A red pickup, maybe a blue one, nothing special. I chalked it up to nerves, but a nagging unease began to build, a whisper in my gut that something wasn't right. Jenna kept glancing at the side mirror, her movement subtle but frequent, as if tracking something behind us. When I pressed her about her truck's breakdown, her story shifted, the details slipping like sand through fingers. "So, what kind of truck was it again?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She paused, her eyes flickering. "Oh, it's a red one. Old model, you know." But I distinctly remembered her saying blue earlier. My unease sharpened, a blade pressing against my nerves. We were deep in the most isolated stretch of the route now, the forest a wall of shadow on either side, not a single light or vehicle in sight. That's when I saw them headlights in my rear-view mirror, approaching fast, too fast for this lonely road. Jenna saw them too, and her demeanor changed in an instant. The shivering, grateful girl vanished, replaced by something cold, calculating, her posture rigid. "Pull over," she ordered, her voice hard as steel. I blinked, my heart stuttering. "What? Why?" "Just do it," she snapped, her hand dipping into her jacket. The glint of metal caught my eye, a pistol, its barrel a silent threat. My blood turned to ice, the truth crashing over me like a wave. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a setup, and I was the mark. I slowed the van, my mind racing for a way out. If I stopped, I was done for. Her gun made that clear. But running wasn't an option either, not with a car closing in and nowhere to turn. In that split second of indecision, Jenna made the choice for me. She lunged, grabbing the wheel and yanking it hard to the right. The van swerved violently, tires screeching as they hit the soft shoulder. I fought to regain control, but the momentum was too much. The world spun a sickening lurch, a crunch of metal, and the van rolled, once, twice, before slamming to a stop on its side in a ditch. For a moment, everything was still, the only sounds the hiss of the radiator and the ringing in my ears. Pain erupted in waves, my head throbbing where it had struck the window, warm blood trickling down my temple. I blinked, disoriented, the van's interior a jumbled wreck around me. Jenna was gone, the passenger door hanging open above me like a gaping wound. Outside, voices male, urgent cut through the haze. "Check the van." One shouted. "Boss wants him alive." Panic fueled me, a raw surge of survival instinct. I fumbled with my seatbelt, the clasp releasing with a reluctant click. I fell awkwardly onto the driver's side door, every movement a spike of agony, but I forced myself to move. The back of the van was chaos, packages scattered like confetti, but amid the wreckage, I spotted a crowbar, its cold weight a lifeline. I grabbed it just as a face appeared in the shattered windshield, a man, late 30s, with a jagged scar across his brow. His eyes widened when he saw me conscious. "He's awake," he yelled. "Get over here." I didn't give him a chance to act. With a guttural cry, I swung the crowbar, the metal cracking against his skull with a sickening thud. He fell back, clutching his head, and I seized the moment, prying at the driver's side door. The warped frame resisted, but adrenaline gave me strength. I squeezed through the narrow gap, emerging into the cold night, the forest looming like a dark fortress. 4 figures stood before me, including Jenna, their faces a mix of shock and fury, all armed with glinting weapons. "Don't move," one growled, raising a shotgun, but I was already running, fueled by terror and defiance. I plunged into the woods, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, their shouts echoed, the crash of underbrush marking their pursuit. I ran blindly, the forest a maze of shadow and sound, my lungs burning as I pushed deeper into its embrace. The crowbar was still clutched in my hand, a heavy reminder of my narrow escape. I don't know how long I ran. Time dissolved in the haze of fear, but the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, swallowed by the forest's vastness. Eventually, I collapsed behind a moss-covered log, my chest heaving, my body screaming for rest. I strained to listen, the night alive with the chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves. No footsteps, no voices, just the forest, indifferent to my plight. As my breathing slowed, the weight of my situation settled in. I was lost, injured, with no phone and no sense of direction. Somewhere out there, Jenna and her crew were hunting me, their motives a mystery but their intent clear. I allowed myself a moment of despair, my head resting against the log, but only a moment. I couldn't give up. Using the faint glow of the stars, I oriented myself and began to walk, each step a battle against pain and fear. The forest seemed to watch me, its shadows shifting with every gust of wind. Every snap of a twig sent my heart racing, every silhouette a potential threat. Hours passed, the sky lightening to a pale gray as dawn crept closer. Then, like a miracle, I heard it, the distant hum of traffic, a lifeline in the wilderness. I quickened my pace, the sound growing louder until the trees parted, revealing a two-lane highway, its asphalt a ribbon of hope. A pickup truck approached, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. I waved my arms, probably looking like a madman, my clothes torn, my face bloodied. The truck slowed, an older couple peering out, their faces etched with concern. "Good Lord, son, what happened to you?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled state. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I need help," I croaked. "Someone's after me." They didn't hesitate, ushering me into the cab, the man's voice firm as he promised to drive me to the sheriff's station. As we pulled away, the forest receded in the side mirror, its secrets buried in its depths. At the station, my story was met with raised eyebrows, but as I described Jenna and her accomplices, the scar-faced man, the shotgun, the coordinated ambush, the deputy's expression shifted to grim recognition. "We've had reports of a crew like this along Highway 95, he said, his pen pausing over his notepad. "They target lone drivers, truckers, couriers, anyone isolated. You're the first to get away and tell the tale." Over the next few weeks, I worked with the police, poring over mugshots and giving statements. They found my van, abandoned in a ravine, but Jenna and her gang had vanished, ghosts in the Idaho night. I couldn't return to my old job. The thought of those empty highways, their shadows hiding predators, filled me with a paralyzing dread. But in a strange way, Jenna's betrayal had given me a purpose. I started writing, sharing my story on forums for drivers, then speaking at safety workshops for logistics workers. My words resonated, sparking conversations about the unseen dangers of the road. My brush with death had reshaped me, turning a quiet courier into an advocate, a voice for those who traveled the lonely stretches. Yet the fear lingered, a quiet passenger in my daily life. I checked my mirrors more often, avoided late-night drives, and kept a crowbar by my bedside, its weight a reminder of the night I fought back. Out there, on the dark highways, not every cry for help is genuine. Sometimes, the hand reaching out is the one holding the trap, and the only way to survive is to trust the voice in your gut even when it tells you to keep driving. The chill that settled over me as I crossed the threshold of Hollow Ridge Hall was more than the draft of an old house. It was a presence, a weight that clung to the air like damp velvet. The first whisper I heard could have been the wind slipping through a cracked window, the second perhaps my own nerves playing tricks. But when the laughter, high and fleeting, like a child's echo, drifted from the shadowed corridors, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I wasn't alone in this ancient manor. Whatever shared these walls with me wasn't bound by flesh, and it was watching. I'd taken the job out of sheer necessity, a desperate grasp at stability after graduating with a history degree and a mountain of debt. The ad had appeared in a local paper, tucked between garage sale listings. "Historic estate seeks overnight caretaker. Night shifts only. Generous pay." It seemed like a godsend, a chance to live rent-free in a grand old house while I figured out my next move. The interview, however, was a study in unease. The estate's owner, Ms. Agatha Voss, was a frail figure swathed in black lace, her eyes magnified by thick spectacles that gave her an owl-like intensity. "You're not frightened of shadows, are you, dear?" she'd asked, her voice a dry rustle, like leaves skittering across stone. I'd forced a laugh, shaking my head. "Not at all, ma'am," she nodded, her lips twitching into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good. Hollow Ridge demands a steady heart. The nights are long. I should have heeded the warning woven into her words, but the promise of a paycheck and a roof over my head drowned out my misgivings. My first night at Hollow Ridge was quiet, if unnerving. The hall was a Gothic labyrinth, its towering ceilings and endless rooms a testament to a forgotten era. My duties were simple: patrol the corridors, ensure the windows were latched, and report any disturbances. The house creaked and groaned, its timbers settling like an old man's bones, but nothing stirred beyond the flicker of candlelight on the walls. I told myself the unease was just the weight of the place, its history pressing against my modern sensibilities. It was on my third night that the strangeness began to unravel. I was making my rounds, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, when a soft hum drifted from a disused guest room. It was melodic, almost lullaby-like, but laced with a dissonance that set my teeth on edge. I froze, the beam trembling as it fixed on the door, its mahogany surface carved with roses that seemed to writhe in the light. The humming stopped, abrupt as a snapped string. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the corridor's vastness. "Is someone there?" Silence answered, thick and oppressive. Then, a giggle sharp, childlike, skittering down the hall like a pebble across ice. My skin prickled, a cascade of goosebumps. I approached the door, my hand hovering over the brass knob. It was cold, unnaturally so, as if it had been plucked from a freezer. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The room was empty, its air heavy with dust. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a four-poster bed draped in moth-eaten velvet. But there, in the center of the floor, was a smudge in the dust, a small footprint, no larger than a child's, its edges too crisp to be old. I backed out, my heart a wild drumbeat, and closed the door with a trembling hand. A prank, I told myself, maybe the groundskeeper's kid sneaking around, or a trick of the light. But as the nights wore on, the incidents grew harder to rationalize. Books toppled from shelves when my back was turned. Doors I'd locked swung open on my next pass, their hinges silent as if mocking me. And always, that sense of being watched, a pressure at the nape of my neck that made every shadow pulse with intent. The breaking point came on my seventh night. I was in the grand library, a cavern of oak and leather where the air smelled of wax and ancient paper. I was reshelving a stack of volumes that had inexplicably fallen, their pages splayed like broken wings, when something brushed against my ankle. I yelped, dropping a book, and looked down, expecting a rat or one of the manor's feral cats. Instead, I saw a pale hand, small, translucent, reaching from behind a bookcase. It retreated with a whisper of movement, followed by that same childlike giggle, now joined by the patter of footsteps fading into the stacks. "This isn't funny," I shouted, my voice cracking with a mix of fear and defiance. "Whoever's out there, show yourself." The only reply was the house's ceaseless creaking, a chorus of disapproval. I bolted from the library, my flashlight beam jittering across the walls, no longer caring about my duties. I just wanted out. But as I reached the foyer, a sight stopped me cold. At the top of the grand staircase stood Miss Voss, but not as I'd met her. Her hair was raven black, her posture regal, her face unlined yet somehow wrong, as if it were a mask stretched too tight. "Leaving so soon, my dear?" she asked, her voice echoing with an unnatural resonance, like wine through a hollow reed. "What is this place?" I demanded, my hands clenched to keep them from shaking. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. Hollow Ridge Hall has always drawn the lost and the desperate, she said, her words curling around me like smoke. It feeds on their fear, their essence. And you, child, are such a delectable guest. As she spoke, figures materialized around her children in tattered smocks, their eyes sunken and dark. A man in a footman's livery, his throat slashed open. A woman in a maid's apron, her head lolling at an impossible angle. They were not human, not anymore, their forms flickering like candle flames. "What are you?" I whispered, backing toward the front door. Ms. Voss's smile grew, a grotesque parody of warmth. "We are the keepers of Hollow Ridge, bound to its hunger. And now, my dear, so are you." The figures began to descend, their whispers rising into a cacophony, a chorus of hunger and malice. I yanked at the front door, but it held fast, as if sealed by an unseen hand. Panic clawed at me, my breath coming in shallow gasps. In desperation, I grabbed a bronze candlestick from a nearby console, its weight solid in my grip, and swung it at the nearest window. The glass shattered, shards raining onto the parquet floor, and I dove through, ignoring the cuts that bloomed across my arms and legs. I landed on the overgrown lawn, the night air sharp and cold, and ran without looking back. The manor loomed behind me, its windows glowing like malevolent eyes, but I didn't stop until I reached the county road, my lungs burning, my body screaming. A passing delivery driver took pity on me, his truck's headlights a beacon in the dark. I spilled my story to the police in a frantic rush, expecting disbelief. Instead, they exchanged weary glances. Hollow Ridge Hall burned down in 1947, the sergeant said, his voice flat. Nothing left but a scorched foundation and some weeds. I didn't believe them. I couldn't. The next day, I drove back, determined to prove I wasn't unhinged. But there it was, an empty lot, overgrown with brambles, the air heavy with the scent of ash. No manor, no Ms. Voss, no ghosts. Yet as I stood there, the wind carrying the faint creak of a weather vane that wasn't there, I saw something glint in the grass. I approached, my heart in my throat, and found it, the candlestick, its bronze tarnished but unmistakable, lying as if placed for me to find. I left it there, too terrified to touch it, and drove away, my rear-view mirror empty save for a fleeting glimpse of the manor, tall and imposing, a pale face watching from an upstairs window. I never returned to Hollow Ridge. I moved across the country, changed my name, and buried that night in the deepest corners of my mind. But the whispers follow me, soft and insidious, in the quiet hours before dawn. I see shadows flicker in my peripheral vision, hear the giggle of unseen children in the creak of my apartment's floorboards. The job ad still surfaces sometimes, in obscure online forums or yellowed classifieds. Historic estate seeks overnight caretaker. Night shifts only. Generous pay. I want to scream a warning, to beg others to steer clear, but who would believe me? Who would listen to a woman claiming she worked in a manor that vanished decades ago? So I keep silent, my doors locked, my lights burning through the night. Hollow Ridge changed me, stripped away the naive lens through which I viewed the world. I collect tales of the uncanny now, stories of places where the veil between worlds thins, because I know there's more to reality than most dare to see. Sometimes, when the wind howls and the shadows dance, I feel the pull of Hollow Ridge's corridors, the lure of its secrets calling me back. But I remember Ms. Voss's too wide smile, the cold grasp of spectral hands, And I know some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. I stay away, but a part of me fears that Holleridge is waiting, its hunger patient, ready to claim its newest keeper when my resolve finally falters. The moment I caught the glint in the townsfolk's eyes, a chill slithered down my spine, as if I'd peered into a void where souls should have been. Their stares were empty, glassy, like marbles polished to an unnatural sheen, and as my husband, Eli, asked for directions, I realized with a creeping horror that we hadn't stumbled into a quaint pit stop. We'd wandered into a trap, and the quiet streets of Ashen Vale were a stage set for our undoing. It was meant to be a simple detour, a chance to weave some charm into our annual Thanksgiving drive to Eli's parents' house in Ohio. We'd made the trip from Chicago a dozen times, always sticking to the familiar hum of I-80, but this year, we craved something different, a scenic route through the heartland, dotted with small towns and their promise of nostalgia. Eli, ever the optimist, had mapped out a path through rural Indiana, his eyes bright with the prospect of mom-and-pop diners and historic courthouses. I'd agreed, charmed by his enthusiasm, never imagining that our whim would lead us to the edge of something unspeakable. We were deep in the flatlands, surrounded by endless fields of wheat swaying under a gray November sky, when our SUV began to falter. A low, grinding whine rose from the engine, a sound that tightened my chest with dread. Eli eased off the gas, his knuckles whitening on the wheel, but the vehicle limped only a few more miles before it gave out entirely, shuddering to a stop on a lonely stretch of two-lane road. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the wind's mournful howl across the fields. "There's got to be a town nearby," Eli said, squinting at his phone, its screen stubbornly blank. "No signal out here." I nodded, trying to mask my unease. "I saw a sign a ways back, Ashen Vale, I think. Can't be too far." We gathered our essentials, a water bottle, a flashlight, our coats, and started walking, the dusk creeping in like a thief, cloaking the road in a gauzy fog. The air was sharp, tinged with the earthy scent of damp soil, and the silence was unnatural. No birds, no rustling critters, just our footsteps crunching on gravel. After what felt like hours, a cluster of lights flickered into view, a mirage against the mist. Ashen Vale emerged, its clapboard buildings and steepled church frozen in a 1950s postcard, eerily still for early evening. The town was a ghost of itself, its streets empty, its storefronts dark save for a single diner, its neon sign stuttering open in a sickly yellow glow. "Thank God," I muttered, my breath visible in the chill. "Maybe they've got a phone." But as we approached, a prickle of wrongness settled in my gut. The diner's windows revealed a handful of patrons, their postures rigid, their faces turned toward us in unison as we pushed through the door. The bell above jingled, a shrill note that seemed to echo too long in the hushed space. Every head swiveled, their eyes locking onto us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. They were wrong, too bright, too vacant, like the glass eyes of taxidermy trophies. "Hi," Eli said, his voice wavering but polite. "Our car broke down a few miles back. Could we use your phone to call a tow?" For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they smiled, identical, mechanical grins that stretched their faces into grotesque masks, devoid of warmth or humanity. A waitress approached, her movements jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. Her uniform was crisp, but her face was a blank slate, her smile a rehearsed imitation. "Welcome to Ashen Vale," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. We don't see many strangers here. I forced a laugh, trying to ease the tension. I can see why, I said under my breath, earning a sharp glance from Eli. About that phone, he pressed, but the waitress continued as if he hadn't spoken. You must be weary from your travels. Sit, have some pie. Our apple pie is the pride of the county. Before we could protest, she herded us into a booth, the vinyl creaking under our weight. The other patrons hadn't moved, their eyes still fixed on us, their smiles unwavering. The air was thick with a cloying scent of cinnamon and something sour, like milk gone bad. Look, Eli said, his voice firm now, we really just need a phone. If you don't have one, is there a garage or a motel nearby? The waitress's smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. No need to rush off, she said. Guests in Ashenvale always stay for pie. As if on cue, a man emerged from the kitchen, his apron stained with something dark and viscous. He set 2 plates of apple pie before us, the crust golden but the filling an unsettling shade of red, like congealed blood. Eli and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that something was terribly wrong. It's getting late, I said, forcing a cheerful tone. We should find a place to crash. Is there a motel in town? The waitress's grin stretched impossibly wider. Oh, we have plenty of room here. Ashenvale always has space for new folks. The way she said folks sent a shiver through me, a word laced with a hunger I couldn't name. I stood, grabbing Eli's hand. Thanks, but we're leaving, I said, my voice trembling. As we moved toward the door, the patrons rose as one, forming a human wall between us and the exit, their smiles now a grotesque parody of welcome. Don't be unkind, the waitress said, her tone sharp, all pretense of warmth gone. You haven't tasted the pie. My heart pounded, a caged animal desperate to break free. We needed a way out, now. Look! I shouted, pointing at the window. What's that? It was a desperate ploy, but it worked. Their heads turned in unison, a synchronized twitch. We bolted for the kitchen, shoving past the cook, who stood frozen, a cleaver dangling from his hand. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and sizzling pans, the air thick with grease and that same sour tang. At the back, a door marked exit beckoned. I slammed into it, Eli right behind me, and we burst into the night, the cold air a shock to our lungs. But our relief was fleeting. The town had come alive, figures emerging from every doorway, their movements stiff yet relentless, converging on us like moths to a flame. This way, Eli hissed, pulling me into a narrow alley between a barber shop and a hardware store. We ran, our boots splashing through puddles, the sound of pursuit growing louder, footsteps, low murmurs, the occasional clatter of something heavy. The alley opened onto another street, but it was no use. They were everywhere, their faces now blank, their eyes glowing with that same vacant sheen. What do they want? I gasped, my back pressed against a brick wall as the crowd closed in. As if in answer, they parted, and a figure stepped forward, an old woman, her back bowed, leaning on a gnarled cane. Unlike the others, her eyes were sharp, piercing, alive with a cruel intelligence. Welcome, travelers, she said, her voice strong, cutting through the fog. We've been expecting you. Eli's hand tightened on mine. What is this place? He demanded. What do you want with us? The woman's chuckle was a dry rattle, like bones in a sack. Ashenvale has stood here for centuries, waiting for souls like yours. We need fresh blood, new minds to join our fold. As she spoke, the townsfolk changed, their skin growing translucent, their features blurring into something less than human, elongated limbs, eyes too large, mouths stretched into gaping maws. "You're not people, are you?" I whispered, horror dawning. Her smile widened, a grotesque crescent. "We were, once. But Ashen Veil remade us, perfected us. And now, it's your turn." She raised her cane, and the crowd surged, their cold hands grasping, pulling us down. I fought, kicking and clawing, but there were too many, their strength unnatural. Eli's shout was cut off as he was swallowed by the mass, his hand slipping from mine. As my vision darkened, the old woman loomed above, her form shimmering, shifting into something vast and incomprehensible. "Welcome home," she said, and the world dissolved into black. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke, I was lying in a soft bed, the room around me a picture of rustic charm, quilted blankets, a braided rug, a window framing a perfect sunrise. Eli lay beside me, still unconscious, his breathing shallow. For a moment, I thought it was a nightmare, a fevered dream born of exhaustion. Then I caught my reflection in a mirror across the room. My eyes were different, glassy, lifeless, like those of the townsfolk. I tried to scream, but my mouth curved into a wide, unnatural smile, moving against my will. Through the window, Ashen Veil gleamed, a postcard-perfect town bathed in golden light. The streets bustled with figures, their smiles identical to mine, their eyes empty. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that Eli and I were no longer visitors. We were part of Ashen Veil now, bound to its hunger, destined to greet the next weary travelers who wandered into its embrace. The town was a living thing, its heart beating beneath the earth, and we were its newest limbs, smiling forever in a place where no one ever leaves. The instant my triumph Bonneville roared out of sight around the bend, its chrome glinting under the street lights, a sickening weight settled in my gut. It wasn't just the loss of my prized motorcycle, a companion through countless midnight rides and open roads. It was the chilling realization that I'd handed a predator the keys to my world. He knew where I lived, where I slept, and the smug glint in his eyes as he sped away told me he wasn't done with me yet. It had started with a reluctant decision, born of necessity rather than desire. I'd been laid off from my mechanic job at a garage in Reno, the latest casualty of a shrinking economy, and the bills were piling up like leaves in autumn. My Bonneville, a 1970s classic I'd restored with my own hands, was my pride, its throaty rumble an anthem of freedom. But pride doesn't pay the rent, and with my savings dwindling, I posted an ad online, complete with photos of its gleaming black tank and a detailed history of its rebuild. Within a day, a message arrived from a guy named Vince. Vince seemed like a dream buyer. His emails were concise but knowledgeable, asking about the bike's engine mods and maintenance log with the precision of a fellow gearhead. On the phone, his voice was gravelly but friendly, the kind that put you at ease, like he was someone you'd swap stories with over a cold one. We arranged to meet in the parking lot of a dive bar on the edge of town, a public spot with enough foot traffic to feel safe. When Vince pulled up in a beat-up pickup, he looked the part, late 30s, leather vest, boots scuffed from years on the road. He circled the Bonneville, his eyes tracing its curves with a reverence I respected. We talked shop for a while, bonding over carburetors and desert rides, and I felt a pang of regret at letting the bike go. "Mind if I take her for a spin?" Vince asked, his hand resting on the handlebar, his smile easy but sharp at the edges. Just a quick loop to feel the throttle. I hesitated, a flicker of unease stirring in my chest. Test rides were standard, but something about his casual confidence set my nerves on edge. I pushed it aside, not wanting to seem overly cautious. "Yeah, all right," I said, tossing him the keys. "Just keep it to the block, yeah?" His grin widened, a flash of teeth that didn't quite reach his eyes, and he swung onto the saddle. The engine roared to life, a familiar growl that echoed in my bones, and he peeled out, giving me a lazy wave as he rounded the corner. I stood there, the bar's neon sign buzzing overhead, waiting for the rumble to circle back. 5 minutes passed. 10. The desert air was cool against my skin, but sweat beaded on my forehead. By 15 minutes, my stomach was a knot of dread, the truth sinking in like a stone. Vince wasn't coming back. I yanked out my phone, my hands shaking as I called his number straight to voicemail. I fired off a text, then another, each one more frantic. No reply. Then, a notification pinged, a message from Vince's number. "Nice bike, pal. Lock your windows tonight." The words were a gut punch, stealing my breath. This wasn't just theft, it was a threat, a dark promise that lingered like smoke. I called the police, my voice unsteady as I explained the theft. The officer was sympathetic but blunt, jotting down Vince's description: a medium build, dark hair, leather vest, and the bike's details. "We'll put out an alert," he said, "but without a tracker, it's tough. You got somewhere safe to stay?" I nodded, though the idea of abandoning my apartment felt like defeat. This was my turf, my home, and I'd be damned if some lowlife was going to scare me off. Back at my place, a cramped one-bedroom above a laundromat, I triple-checked the locks and jammed a broomstick against the sliding glass door. Every sound, the hum of the dryer downstairs, the creak of the floorboards, became a potential intruder. Sleep was impossible. I sat on the couch, a tire iron from my toolbox clutched in my hands, my eyes glued to the window. Around 3 a.m., the unmistakable roar of the Bonneville's engine cut through the night, growing louder as it approached. I crept to the blinds, peering out. There it was, idling in the alley below, its chrome glinting under a street lamp. A figure straddled it, face shadowed by a helmet, but the posture was unmistakable: Vince, or someone he'd sent, watching me. My heart hammered, a wild rhythm that drowned out reason. Was he taunting me, daring me to come out? I gripped the tire iron, debating whether to call the cops again, but the minutes it would take them to arrive stretched like an eternity. The figure revved the engine, the sound a deliberate provocation, then sped off, the taillights vanishing into the dark. I sank back, my breath ragged, the tire iron slipping from my sweaty palms. This was a game, and I was losing. The next day, I was a wreck, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep, my nerves frayed to snapping. I called in sick to my new gig at an auto parts store, unable to focus on anything but Vince's threat. As I brewed coffee, my phone buzzed with another message from his number. "Missed me last night? Don't worry, I'll swing by soon. Sweet dreams." The words were a blade, carving deeper into my resolve. I couldn't live like this, jumping at every noise, waiting for the next move in his sadistic chess match. I needed to take control. I spent the day fortifying my apartment, channeling my fear into action. I dragged a heavy toolbox in front of the door, rigged a string of bells across the windows, and kept the tire iron close. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sliver of agency, a way to fight back against the dread. As night fell, I positioned myself in the corner of the living room, the lights off, the tire iron across my lap. The hours ticked by, each passing car a jolt to my system, each shadow a potential threat. Just after 2 a.m., the Bonneville's roar returned, slow and deliberate, circling like a shark. The engine cut off, and silence descended, thick and suffocating. Then came the footsteps, heavy, confident, climbing the fire escape. The window rattled, the bells jangling in a frantic chorus. I gripped the tire iron, my pulse a war drum, every muscle coiled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the glass shattered, a cascade of shards across the floor, and a figure climbed through, his silhouette hulking in the moonlight. I didn't hesitate. I swung the tire iron with all my strength, the metal connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, staggering, and I swung again, catching him in the ribs. He collapsed, cursing through clenched teeth, his voice raw with pain. I fumbled for the light switch, the tire iron still raised, ready to strike. In the harsh glow, I saw him clearly, not Vince, but a stranger, older, his face weathered and scarred, his eyes blazing with rage. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, staining the carpet. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking but firm. He spat, a red glob hitting the floor. "Don't matter," he growled. "Your buddy Vince owed me. Said the bike was mine to settle up. Figured I'd see what else you got worth taking." The truth hit like a backhand. Vince hadn't just stolen my bike, he'd used it as a bargaining chip, tossing me to this thug like chum to a shark. I was a pawn in a deal I hadn't known existed. Sirens wailed in the distance, a neighbor's 911 call cutting through the night. As police lights flashed through the broken window, relief flooded me, tinged with the bitter sting of violation. The man was cuffed and dragged away, his threats fading into the night. The cops found my Bonneville a week later, ditched in a vacant lot, its tank scratched but intact. I sold it to a dealer, the cash going toward a security system, cameras, motion sensors, the works. Some called it paranoia, but to me, it was survival. Life crept back to normal, but I was different, warier. My trust in strangers eroded to dust. I flinched at unfamiliar faces, checked my locks obsessively, and kept the tire iron by my bed. One evening, as I left the auto parts store, I saw a guy leaning against a Harley in the parking lot, his silhouette eerily familiar. Panic surged, but as he turned, I recognized a coworker, his grin easy and unaware. "Wanna take her for a spin?" he called. I froze, the old me itching to say yes, but the new me shook my head. "Maybe later," I said, hurrying to my car. That night, I sat on my couch, the security camera's feed glowing on my phone. A motorcycle roared past, its sound once a call to adventure, now a shiver down my spine. Vince had tried to break me, to turn my home into a cage of fear. But I'd fought back, and I'd won. The open road still called, but I'd answer it on my terms, with a wary eye and a grip that never loosened. The first scream that echoed through the labyrinthine depths of Raven's Crag was a jagged blade, slicing through the thrill of our adventure and plunging us into a primal fight for survival. What we uncovered in those shadowed caverns would haunt us forever if we made it out alive. Our weekend getaway, planned with the reckless enthusiasm of seasoned explorers, had transformed into a descent into a nightmare, where the earth itself seemed to conspire against us. It was supposed to be a grand escapade, a chance to test our mettle against the wilds of Montana's Bitterroot Mountains. My friends Lila, Marcus, Tessa, and I had been plotting this trip for months, our group chat buzzing with maps and gear lists. We were no strangers to the outdoors, having conquered trails from Yosemite to the Adirondacks, but Raven's Crag was different. The cave system was legendary, its name whispered in hiking forums alongside tales of vanished spelunkers and eerie moans carried on the wind. We laughed off the stories as folklore, the kind of yarn spun to spook tourists over campfires. How wrong we were, how dangerously naive. The hike to the cave's entrance was a symphony of autumn crisp air, leaves crunching underfoot, and sunlight filtering through a canopy of gold and crimson. The Bitterroots loomed around us, their peaks jagged against a cloudless sky. As we reached the crag, a yawning maw of black stone framed by moss and lichen, a cool breeze wafted out, carrying the musty scent of ancient earth. "Here we are," Marcus said, his voice tinged with excitement and a hint of nerves. "Raven's Crag. Last chance to bail." Lila rolled her eyes, adjusting her headlamp. "Don't tell me you're buying those ghost stories, Marcus." Tessa was already checking her pack, her grin defiant. "We didn't haul all this gear to chicken out. Let's do this." I nodded, ignoring the faint prickle at the base of my skull. We were prepared: ropes, carabiners, first aid kits, and enough batteries to light a small city. What could go wrong? The first hour inside was breathtaking. Vast chambers unfurled before us, their walls shimmering with quartz veins that caught our headlamps' beams like frozen starlight. We navigated narrow passages, marveling at stalactites that hung like chandeliers carved by millennia. The air was cool, heavy with the tang of mineral and damp, and our laughter echoed, a fleeting defiance of the cave's silence. Trouble stirred when we reached a junction not marked on our map. The path should have been singular, a clear route through the crag's heart, but here were 3 tunnels, each gaping like a hungry mouth. "This isn't right," I muttered, tracing the map's creased lines with my finger. Marcus peered into the darkness, his headlamp beam swallowed by the voids. "Maybe the map's old. Caves shift, right? Water, erosion." Tessa nodded, but her usual bravado faltered. "So, which way?" We debated, our voices hushed, as if the cave itself were listening. In the end, we chose the middle tunnel, its slight upward slope suggesting a path back to the surface. A fateful choice, though we didn't know it then. As we ventured deeper, the air grew colder, our breath puffing invisible clouds. The tunnel's walls were unnaturally smooth, polished to a glassy sheen, and a faint odor crept in, musty, with a sickly sweet undertone, like rotting fruit. "Anyone else smell that?" Tessa asked, her voice tight. We paused, sniffing the air, the sweetness now unmistakable, cloying in our throats. "Probably just some fungus," Marcus said, but his tone lacked conviction. We pressed on, the tunnel widening into a colossal chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow, our headlamps barely denting the darkness. That's when the scream came, a distant, guttural wail that froze us in place, our beams darting wildly. "What the hell was that?" Lila whispered, her eyes wide. "Wind," Tessa said, but her voice trembled, betraying her doubt. We all knew it wasn't wind. The sound was human, raw, and laced with terror. "We should turn back," Marcus said, already retreating. I opened my mouth to agree when another scream erupted, closer now, not a cry of fear but a warlike bellow, primal and ferocious. Before we could react, Shapes surged from the chamber's edges, moving with a speed that defied reason. In the frantic sweep of our headlamps, I glimpsed them pale, almost translucent skin stretched over elongated limbs, eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian, reflecting our light with a predatory glint. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Tessa's arm and hauling her back toward the tunnel. We sprinted, the sound of pursuit a cacophony of hisses and skittering claws, the smooth walls now a malevolent trap, funneling us deeper into the crag. We skidded around a bend, only to slam into a dead-end, a solid wall of stone where the tunnel should have continued. "This wasn't here," Lila gasped, her hands scrabbling at the rock. No time to question it, the creatures were closing in, their shadows flickering at the tunnel's mouth. I scanned frantically, my headlamp catching a hairline fracture in the wall, a crevice barely wide enough for a person. "There!" I yelled, pointing. One by one, we forced ourselves through, the stone scraping our skin, tearing at our packs. I went last, my heart pounding as something grabbed my boot. I kicked wildly, a hiss of pain rewarding my effort, and scrambled through, the crevice sealing us into a new chamber. We emerged into a smaller cavern, its walls pocked with branching tunnels, each a gamble. Without a word, we picked one and ran, our footsteps echoing like gunfire. The pursuit had faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against our eardrums. We collapsed in a huddle, gasping, our headlamps casting jittery pools of light. What were those things? Tessa panted, her face ashen. No one answered. We were lost, hunted in a maze that defied logic, our map useless, our supplies dwindling. As we caught our breath, a low growl rumbled through the tunnel, followed by the scrape of claws on stone, growing closer. "Move," Marcus whispered, his voice urgent. But as we turned to flee, they appeared, pale figures blocking every exit, their humanoid forms twisted, their limbs too long, their fingers ending in wicked talons. Their mouths gaped, revealing needle-sharp teeth and feral grins. We were trapped, cornered in a tomb of stone. Just as despair took hold, a new sound pierced the cave, a high-pitched keening, a wail that vibrated in our bones and blurred our vision. The creatures recoiled, clutching their heads, their hisses turning to shrieks. A blinding light flooded the chamber, forcing us to squint. Through the glare, new figures emerged, tall, willowy beings that seemed to glow from within, their forms fluid, almost liquid. In their hands were weapons of pure light, pulsing with an energy that hummed in the air. What followed was a clash beyond comprehension, a whirlwind of snarls and flashes as the glowing beings cut through the pale creatures with surgical precision. In moments, it was over, the cavern strewn with the fallen, their bodies dissolving into wisps of ash. One of the glowing figures approached, its face a shifting mosaic of beauty and strangeness, its eyes like twin stars. "You should not be here," it said, its voice resonating in my mind, not my ears. "This place is not for your kind." I stammered, my voice hoarse. "We got lost. Please, we just want to go home." The being regarded us, its gaze piercing, then nodded. "We will guide you to the surface. But you must never return, and you must never speak of this." In a daze, we followed, the journey a blur of twisting tunnels and flickering light. Before I knew it, we were stumbling into daylight, the cave's entrance a jagged scar in the mountainside. We turned back, but the opening was gone, replaced by a sheer rock face, as if the crag had swallowed itself. We never spoke of that day, humming in on the details, too stunned to process it fully. The police found the cabin, stripped bare, but enough evidence remained to suggest a significant operation, likely trafficking, though the specifics were unclear. As I gave my statement, the weight of our escape settled in. We'd survived, but the memory of those creatures, the war beneath the earth, would haunt us forever. We kept our vow of silence, the trauma too raw to share, even among ourselves. But in the dead of night, I still hear those screams, feel the cold stone against my skin. Raven's Crag had marked us, its secrets buried but not forgotten. The next time someone suggests caving, I'll propose a quiet pub instead. Some depths are meant to remain unexplored, their mysteries locked away in the dark, where they belong. The moment the pickup truck swerved toward my sedan, its headlights glaring through the rain-streaked windshield, I knew this was no mere road rage. The driver's eyes burned with a cold, calculated malice, a promise of violence that sent my heart into a frantic gallop. As I veered off the slick asphalt, my tires skidding toward the embankment, one thought seared through my mind: they had found me, and they would stop at nothing to silence me. It had begun 3 days earlier, an unremarkable stop that shattered the fragile peace of my cross-country move. I was driving from Philadelphia to Portland, Oregon, seeking a fresh start after a bruising divorce that left me raw and restless. The long stretches of Route 66 through Oklahoma were a balm, their endless horizons and retro diners a canvas for introspection. I'd found a strange comfort in the solitude, the hum of my old Subaru, a steady companion. The comfort evaporated at a dusty gas station just outside Tulsa, a ramshackle outpost with flickering pumps and a convenience store that smelled of stale coffee. I was topping off my tank, the nozzle heavy in my hand, when raised voices drew my attention. Two men stood near the store's entrance, their argument escalating, their gestures sharp and heated. I tried to focus on the pump's rhythmic click, but a gunshot cracked through the air, sharp and final. My head snapped up, and I saw one man collapse, clutching his chest, blood blooming across his shirt. The other, the shooter, spun, his eyes wild, locking onto mine across the lot. His face was a mask of panic and desperation, the pistol still trembling in his grip. In that instant, I became a witness to a crime, a loose end in a story I was never meant to read. I dove into my car, my hands shaking so badly I fumbled the keys, dropping them twice before the engine roared to life. As I peeled out, gravel spraying, I glimpsed the shooter sprinting toward me in the rearview mirror, his shouts lost in the wind. I hit the highway at 90, my pulse a war drum, my eyes darting to the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. For hours, I drove like a fugitive, weaving through traffic, taking random exits, my mind a whirlwind of fear and indecision. I'd seen a murder, and the killer had seen me. I was the only thing standing between him and freedom. I debated going to the police, the weight of civic duty pressing against my chest. But fear was a powerful deterrent. What if they didn't believe me? What if the shooter had allies, cops on the payroll, a network that could track me even in witness protection? Paranoia, fueled by too many late-night crime podcasts, painted every option as a trap. So I kept driving, pushing west through 3 states, sticking to backroads and small towns. I paid cash for gas and motels, gave fake names at check-in, and spoke to no one beyond necessity. By the 3rd day, exhaustion was a leaden cloak, the constant vigilance eroding my sanity. My eyes burned, my hands trembled, and the gnawing terror in my gut was a living thing, clawing for release. That's when I noticed the truck. At first, it was just another vehicle on the road, a black pickup trailing a few cars back. But as the miles ticked by, it was always there, never overtaking, never falling away. My paranoia flared. Was I imagining it? Had sleep deprivation turned every shadow into a threat? I took a sharp exit onto a county road, my heart pounding as I watched the mirror. The truck followed, its headlights steady, unyielding. Panic surged, a tidal wave that drowned reason. I floored the gas, weaving through sparse traffic, the road narrowing as it cut through dense woods. The truck kept pace, closing the gap, no longer pretending to be anything but a hunter. Rain began to fall, fat drops splattering the windshield, my wipers struggling to keep up. The truck made its move, pulling alongside, its engine a guttural roar. I risked a glance and froze. The driver wasn't the shooter from the gas station. This was someone new, his face shadowed but his eyes unmistakable, burning with intent. He was here to end me. The truck swerved, metal screeching as it grazed my car, forcing me toward the shoulder. I yanked the wheel, fighting to stay on the road, but we were on a bridge now, concrete barriers hemming me in. Another vicious swerve sent my car spinning, a dizzying whirl of light and sound. For a moment, I was weightless, the world tilting as my car crashed through the barrier, plummeting toward the river below. The impact stole my breath, the airbag slamming into my chest as cold water roared through the shattered windows. The car sank, the river's embrace swift and merciless. Training from a long ago lifeguard course kicked in, wait for the car to fill, equalize the pressure, then open the door. But panic is a traitor. The water rose past my waist, my chest, the seatbelt refusing to budge. I clawed at it, my fingers numb, each second an eternity. Just as the water reached my chin, the clasp gave way. I gulped a final breath as the car submerged, the pressure shifting. I forced the door open, kicking free, my clothes dragging like anchors. The surface was a distant promise, my lungs burning, my vision darkening. Just when I thought I'd drown, my head broke through, and I gasped, choking on air and water. The current was brutal, pulling me downstream. I glimpsed the bridge, its broken barrier a scar against the sky, but no sign of the truck or its driver. I fought to the shore, dragging myself onto the muddy bank, my body trembling with cold and shock. I was alive, but the reprieve was temporary. They'd come to finish the job, to ensure no witness remained. I forced myself to my feet, pain lancing through my ribs, and started walking, the river's gurgle my only guide. My soaked clothes chafed, the wind cutting through me, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. Night fell, the moon a pale sentinel offering just enough light to navigate. I stuck to the tree line, jumping at every rustle, my mind racing to unravel the nightmare. The shooter was bad enough, but this truck driver meant others were involved. In network, a conspiracy I'd unwittingly stumbled into. What had I seen at that gas station? A deal gone wrong, a hit, something bigger? Hours later, lights flickered in the distance, a small town nestled in a valley, its glow a beacon of hope and danger. I approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows, my hunger gnawing after days without a proper meal. The town was quiet, its main street lined with a pharmacy, a bar, and a diner still open, its windows spilling warmth. I needed answers, a way out, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. My eyes landed on a library across the street, its brick facade unassuming but promising. Breaking in was easier than expected. The back window's latch gave way with a tug, no alarm to betray me. Inside, I powered up an ancient computer, its hum loud in the silence. I searched for news of the Tulsa gas station shooting, my fingers trembling on the keys. Nothing. No reports, no headlines, as if it had never happened. I broadened my search, scouring for crimes along Route 66. A buried article caught my eye, a string of disappearances, mostly truckers, along the corridor. Locals whispered of a shadowy group, modern-day highwaymen preying on lone travelers. My blood ran cold. Had I stumbled into their web? Was the shooting a piece of a larger puzzle? A car's headlights swept across the window, moving slowly, too slowly. I ducked, my heart pounding. Had they tracked me here? I waited, barely breathing, until the street was silent again, but I knew I couldn't stay. Nowhere was safe. I slipped out, the night swallowing me, and kept moving, my purpose crystallizing with each step. I was in over my head, a pawn in a game I didn't understand, but I was alive. I had information, a fragment of truth, and as long as I breathed, I had a chance. The road stretched out, dark and uncertain, but for the first time since Tulsa, I felt a spark of defiance. They'd tried to kill me, but they'd only made me stronger. I'd find the truth, expose their network, and make them pay no matter what it took. The first video I clicked on revealed a man strapped to a chair, his screams clawing at the edges of my sanity as his tormentors worked in the shadows. The second showed a backroom deal spiraling into chaos, guns drawn and blood spilled. By the third, a chilling montage of coded exchanges and masked figures, I understood with a sinking dread that the second-hand laptop I'd bought wasn't just used, it was a Pandora's box of evidence, and the black SUV idling across the street meant they'd come to reclaim it. And me. It had started with a mundane necessity, the kind that defines a freelancer's life. My old laptop, a wheezing relic held together by duct tape and hope, had finally given up, its screen flickering to black mid-project. As a graphic designer scraping by in Denver's competitive gig economy, I couldn't afford downtime. A new machine was out of reach, so I turned to an online marketplace, scouring listings for a deal. That's when I found Caleb's ad, a high-end laptop, barely a year old, priced at a fraction of its value. The specs were a dream-fast processor, ample storage, perfect for rendering complex designs. I messaged him, half expecting a scam, but his reply was prompt, professional, arranging a meet-up at a trendy coffee shop downtown. Caleb was a jittery guy in his early 30s, his hoodie swallowing his frame, his eyes darting as he nursed a latte. "You're Jamie?" he asked, his voice low, as if afraid of being overheard. I nodded, and he slid the laptop across the table, its sleek casing catching the cafe's warm light. I gave it a quick check, booted it up, ran a few apps, everything humming smoothly. Satisfied, I handed over the cash, a wad of bills I'd scraped together from my last commission. Caleb pocketed it with a forced smile, then bolted out the door, leaving his half-drunk latte behind. I chalked his nerves up to social awkwardness, maybe a bad day. If only I'd known. Back at my loft, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick and creaky floors, I spent the evening setting up my new prize. I transferred files, installed design software, and marveled at the laptop's speed. It was close to midnight when I stumbled across a hidden folder, buried deep in the system files, labeled Archive X. Curiosity, that old temptress, nudged me to open it. What I found stole my breath. Hundreds of video files, their titles cryptic: Depot Exchange '07, Interrogation CW, Drop point alpha. A voice in my head screamed to stop, to shut the laptop and walk away, but I clicked the first file, and the world tilted. The video played, grainy but stark, showing a man bound to a metal chair in a bare room, his face bruised and bloody. Off-screen, a distorted voice barked questions, each refusal met with a sickening act: pliers wrenching a fingernail, a blade tracing his skin. His screams were raw, animalistic, echoing in my skull long after I slammed the laptop shut. My hands trembled, my stomach churning. What had I stumbled into? Who was Caleb, and why was this on his machine? Sleep eluded me, my loft's high ceilings looming like a judgment. I paced, the city's distant hum a faint comfort against the terror clawing my chest. Should I go to the police? But what if they were involved? The video's production value, the sheer volume of files, suggested something vast, organized: a criminal syndicate with tendrils everywhere. By dawn, I'd made a decision: I needed to know more. I spent the day sifting through the files, careful not to play the videos, focusing on documents, ledgers tracking millions in transactions, manifests for shipments labeled only as cargo, encrypted messages hinting at a network spanning continents. This wasn't a small-time operation. It was a colossus of corruption. As evening fell, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows opaque, its engine idling with a low growl. It could have been nothing: a neighbor's ride, a delivery, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. I peered through the blinds, my pulse quickening, and saw the driver, a man in a dark cap, staring straight at my window. Panic surged, a cold wave that locked my joints. They knew. Somehow, they'd traced the laptop to me. Had Caleb ratted me out? Was the machine rigged with a tracker? I grabbed my phone, fingers hovering over 911, but stopped. If this network was as deep as I feared, who could I trust? A plan formed, jagged and desperate. I couldn't stay here, that much was clear, but running blind wasn't enough. I had a responsibility to expose this, to bring the truth to light. I packed a go-bag: clothes, cash, a toothbrush moving with frantic precision. The laptop was a liability, but I couldn't leave it behind. I pried out the hard drive, slipping it into my pocket, and swapped it with the drive from my old machine, a decoy to fool any searchers. As I finished, a knock rattled the door, sharp and insistent. "Miss Harper," a deep voice called, "we need to talk about a recent purchase." I froze, my heart a trapped bird. The door shook under a heavy blow, wood splintering. I bolted for the fire escape, the metal creaking under my weight as I clambered down, the sound of my front door caving in spurring me on. I hit the alley running, my boots splashing through puddles, shouts echoing behind me. I wove through side streets, doubling back, my breath ragged, the hard drive a lead weight in my pocket. Hours later, exhausted and gasping, I ducked into a 24-hour diner, its fluorescent lights a harsh sanctuary. The waitress, her name tag reading Barb, gave me a curious look but poured me a coffee without comment. I sat in a corner booth, the vinyl sticking to my jeans, and pulled out my phone. I needed help, someone I could trust. My mind landed on Lena, my ex-roommate from college, now a crime reporter for a Denver Alt Weekly. If anyone could navigate this, it was her. I dialed, praying she'd answer despite the hour. "Jamie?" She groaned, her voice thick with sleep. "It's 2 in the morning. What's up?" "I'm sorry," I whispered, glancing at the diner's windows. "I'm in deep trouble." I found something huge. Can you meet me? She must have heard the panic in my voice, because she agreed, her tone sharpening. I gave her the diner's address and waited, every car passing outside a potential threat, every patron a possible spy. Lena arrived 20 minutes later, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes bleary but alert. "Okay, Jamie," she said, sliding into the booth. "Spill. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and told her everything: the laptop, the videos, the SUV, the break-in. Her skepticism morphed into shock, then a grim resolve I remembered from our late-night debates. "Show me," she said, her voice low. I pulled out my phone, where I'd backed up a few screenshots from the drive ledgers, a manifest, a still from one video, blurred but damning. Lena's eyes widened as she scrolled. "Jamie, this isn't just a gang. This is systemic. Politicians, cops, judges, look at these names. They're untouchable." My mouth went dry, the weight of her words crushing. "What do we do?" I asked. She thought for a moment, her fingers drumming the table. "We can't go to the police yet, not until we verify this. We need more evidence, and we need to keep you safe." She opened her laptop, typing furiously. "I'm looping in my editor. We'll need protection, resources." As she worked, I glanced outside, and my heart stopped. The black SUV was pulling into the lot, its headlights cutting through the diner's glow. "Lena," I hissed, "we have to go. Now." She followed my gaze, her face paling, and nodded. We grabbed our things and slipped out the back, the cook's curious stare trailing us. We ran through alleys, the city a maze of shadows, the sound of boots pounding behind us never far off. Lena's car, a battered Jeep, was parked a block away. We reached it just as two men rounded the corner, their faces twisted with fury. She floored it, the Jeep lurching into traffic, the city lights blurring past. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I've got a cabin in the Rockies," she said, her eyes on the road. "Off-grid, no paper trail. We'll hole up there, figure out our next move." As Denver's skyline faded, the highway stretching into the night, fear and adrenaline mingled in my veins. In 24 hours, my life had unraveled, thrust into a world of danger I barely understood. But I wasn't alone. Lena's resolve, her belief in the truth, was a lifeline. As dawn broke, the Rockies rising like sentinels against a sky of pink and gold, I clutched the hard drive, its weight a reminder of the stakes. The laptop I'd bought on a budget had dragged me into a conspiracy, but it had also given me a mission. The truth would come out, it had to. I made a silent vow, I'd see this through, no matter the cost, and bring the shadows into the light. The first boot print I found in the dew-soaked earth could have been my own, left carelessly during an evening ramble. The second might have belonged to another hiker, a fellow wanderer in the vast Sierra Nevada. But the third, crisp and deliberate, pressed into the mud just beyond my campsite, sent a shiver through my core, a primal warning that I was not alone. Someone was tracking me, and in the untamed expanse of the Sierras, that could only mean one thing: I was prey. I'd always craved the solitude of solo camping, the kind of isolation that strips away the noise of the world and leaves you raw, connected to the pulse of the wild. This trip was my sanctuary, a 10-day trek through the high country of California's Sierra Nevada, a chance to reset after a grueling year of deadlines and heartbreak. I'd planned meticulously, maps cross-referenced, A pack stuffed with enough supplies for 12 days, a satellite phone tucked away for emergencies I swore I'd never need. The first 4 days were everything I'd dreamed: crystalline lakes reflecting snow-capped peaks, meadows ablaze with wildflowers, and nights under a sky so vast it made my problems feel small. I fell asleep to the whisper of pines and the distant howl of a coyote, the Milky Way a glittering tapestry above. It was on the fifth morning that the illusion shattered. I woke just before dawn, the air sharp with the promise of a crisp day, and began breaking camp with my usual efficiency. That's when I saw a boot print in the soft soil near my tent, its tread distinct from my own worn hiker's. At first, I brushed it off. I'd been tired last night, maybe I'd wandered farther than I thought. But as I scanned the ground, my eyes traced a trail of prints circling my campsite, some so close I could imagine their maker peering through the nylon walls as I slept. My stomach twisted, a cold knot of unease. Someone had been here, watching. I packed faster than ever, my hands fumbling with the tent stakes, my mind racing to rationalize the discovery. A curious hiker, maybe, or a ranger checking on permits. But the prints were too deliberate, too numerous for a passing glance. I hoisted my pack, its weight a familiar anchor, and set out, my pace brisk, my senses heightened. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snap of a twig, made me flinch, my head swiveling to scan the trees. I kept my satellite phone in my pocket, its bulk a reassurance I didn't want to admit I needed. Calling for help felt like admitting defeat, and besides, what would I say? I'd found footprints. I had no proof of danger, only a gnawing instinct that the wilderness had turned hostile. The trail wound through a dense forest of Jeffrey pines, their resinous scent mingling with the damp earth. I pushed deeper, hoping to outrun the unease, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger, a pressure at the back of my neck that refused to relent. By late afternoon, I reached a high ridge, the panorama of granite peaks and alpine valleys breathtaking but no longer comforting. As I paused to catch my breath, a flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow darting between the trees below, too large for a deer, too swift for a casual hiker. My heart stuttered, and I gripped my trekking poles, their metal tips glinting in the fading light. I should have turned back then, headed for the nearest ranger station, but stubbornness or fear of looking foolish kept me moving. I descended into a narrow valley, the trail growing faint, overgrown with manzanita and sage. Dusk was creeping in, painting the sky in hues of violet and ash, when I heard it, a low murmur, like voices carried on the wind. I froze, straining to listen, but the sound vanished, leaving only the thud of my pulse. I told myself it was my imagination, the solitude playing tricks, but as I rounded a bend, I saw it, a cabin, half hidden by a grove of cedars, its weathered logs blending into the twilight. The cabin was no ranger outpost. Its windows were boarded, its roof sagging under the weight of years, but light seeped through the cracks, a sickly yellow glow that felt wrong, like a lure. My instincts screamed to keep moving, but curiosity, that reckless spark, drew me closer. I crept forward, my boots silent on the pine needles, and peered through a gap in the boards. Inside, figures moved, 3, maybe 4, their silhouettes bulky with gear. A table was strewn with equipment, not camping gear but something else, rifles, sleek and military grade, their barrels catching the lamplight. Crates stacked against the walls, their contents obscured but ominous. And a laptop displaying grainy footage, its screen flickering with images I couldn't make out. My breath caught, a realization crystallizing. This was no hiker's refuge. This was a base, a hub for something illegal: smuggling, trafficking, or worse. The voices inside were low, urgent, speaking in clipped phrases I couldn't decipher. I backed away, my heart pounding, but in my haste, I stepped on a dry branch. The snap was a gunshot in the silence, and the voices cut off, sharp and alert. "Check outside," one barked, a deep growl that carried authority. Footsteps crunched, a door creaked, and panic seized me like a vice. I dove behind a boulder, pressing myself into the earth, the cold stone biting through my jacket. Flashlight beams sliced through the dusk, sweeping the clearing, their light grazing the edge of my hiding spot. "Could be a cougar," a second voice said, "closer now, but we ain't taking chances." My breath was shallow, my body curled tight, every sound amplified: the crunch of boots, the rustle of leaves, the thud of my own heart. "Nothing here," another called, but the leader's voice was unyielding. "Keep looking. If it's a ranger, we need them gone." I waited, my lungs burning, until the beams retreated, the footsteps fading back to the cabin. But I knew I wasn't safe. They'd search again, and sooner or later, they'd find me. I scanned the darkening valley, my eyes landing on a narrow ravine, its walls steep and shadowed, half hidden by a fallen log. It was a gamble, but staying here was certain death. I waited until the nearest searcher turned away, then sprinted for the ravine, my pack bouncing painfully against my spine. A shout rang out over there. But I was already sliding into the crevice, the rock scraping my arms as I forced myself through. The ravine was a jagged wound in the earth, its floor littered with loose stones and roots. I ran, stumbling in the near dark, the shouts behind me growing louder, flashlights piercing the gloom. The path twisted, narrowing, and for a moment, I feared it would dead end, trapping me like a rat. But it opened into a broader trail, packed dirt suggesting human use: a hiking path, perhaps, or a smuggler's route. In the distance, a steady light glowed, not a flashlight but the warm pulse of a building. A ranger station, a cabin, my only hope. I pushed forward, my legs leaden, my lungs screaming, the sounds of pursuit a relentless drumbeat. The light grew brighter, resolving into a small log outpost, its windows spilling golden warm. I staggered the final yards, pounding on the door with fists raw from the climb. "Help!" I gasped, my voice hoarse. "Please, someone!" The door flew open, revealing a grizzled man in a ranger's uniform, his face etched with concern. "What's wrong?" he demanded, catching me as I swayed. "Are you hurt?" Between ragged breaths, I spilled my story: the footprints, the cabin, the armed men, the chase. His expression hardened, a storm cloud gathering. "Get inside," he said, guiding me to a chair. "I'm calling this in." He moved to a radio, his voice clipped as he relayed the situation. "This is Warden Holt at Pine Ridge. Got a hiker here, says she found an armed camp in the valley. Send backup, now." He handed me a mug of water, its warmth grounding me, and sat across from me, his eyes steady. "Tell me everything, every detail." I recounted the night, the words tumbling out, the prints circling my tent, the cabin's arsenal, the men's voices plotting in the dark. As I spoke, the adrenaline ebbed, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion. The ranger listened, jotting notes, his face grim. "You're lucky you made it out," he said when I finished. "We've had reports of activity in these parts, but nothing this close. Sounds like a big operation." The radio crackled, confirming help was en route, but as the first light of dawn seeped through the windows, I felt no relief. The Sierras, once a refuge, were now a battleground, their shadows hiding predators I'd never unsee. Days later, I learned the authorities had raided the cabin, finding it stripped bare but littered with traces of what they called a major trafficking ring. I gave my statement, the ranger's steady presence a lifeline, but the experience had changed me. The wilderness was no longer a sanctuary, its beauty tainted by the memory of those prints, that chase. As I boarded a bus back to the city, my pack lighter but my heart heavier, I knew I'd return to this Sierra someday, not alone, never alone again. The mountains still called, but now I carried a truth. The greatest dangers in the wild aren't bears or storms, but the human shadows that stalk in silence, waiting for the unwary to cross their path. The first flicker of headlights in our rearview mirror was a beacon of hope, a promise of rescue on the desolate stretch of Cinder Hollow Road. The second stirred a prickle of unease, their glow too persistent, too close. By the third, as they swelled into blinding orbs, I knew with a gut-twisting certainty that the driver behind us wasn't a good Samaritan. They were hunters, and my family was their quarry. It was supposed to be a joyful pilgrimage, our annual Thanksgiving trek to my in-laws' home in rural Kentucky. My wife, Clara, our two kids Sophie, 9, and Liam, 7, and I had made this drive from Chicago countless times, the route as familiar as a worn quilt. But this year, we'd opted for adventure, a scenic detour through the backroads of southern Illinois, lured by promises of rolling hills and quaint hamlets. Clara had been skeptical, her brow furrowing at the map's winding lines, but the kids' excitement, Sophie's chatter about farm animals, Liam's plea for a real adventure had swayed us. "It'll be fun," I'd said, my optimism a shield against her doubts. If only I'd listened to her quiet reservations. We were deep in the Shawnee National Forest, the road flanked by ancient oaks and sycamores, when our minivan began to falter. A low, grinding hum rose from the engine, a sound that tightened my chest like a vice. "Not now," I muttered, easing off the gas, but the van had other plans. It coughed, shuddered, and died, coasting to a stop on a gravel shoulder, the silence that followed heavy with foreboding. The kids stirred in the back, their voices small in the dark. "Dad, why'd we stop?" Liam asked, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. I forced a smile, my hands still on the wheel. "Just a hiccup, buddy. We'll sort it out." Clara joined me outside, her flashlight beam dancing across the engine's tangle of hoses and wires. I'm no mechanic, but even I could see the problem was beyond a quick fix, a cracked radiator, maybe, or something worse. My phone showed no bars, Clara's the same, the forest's dense canopy mocking our need for connection. "We passed a sign a few miles back," I said, trying to sound confident. "Cinder Hollow, I think. We can walk it." Clara's eyes, usually so steady, were clouded with worry, but she nodded, her jaw set. We bundled the kids in coats, grabbed a backpack with water and snacks, and started down the road, the November air biting at our exposed skin. The forest was alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, but they offered no comfort. The road twisted through the trees, its gravel crunching under our boots, the darkness pressing in like a living thing. Sophie clung to Clara's hand, her chatter silenced, while Liam's small fingers gripped mine, his dinosaur dangling forgotten. After what felt like an eternity, our flashlight caught a faded sign, "Cinder Hollow Road, 20 miles to Salem." Relief flickered, but it was short-lived. The van was miles behind us, and the night was growing colder, the stars hidden by a thickening canopy. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when the engine's growl broke the silence, distant but approaching fast. Headlights pierced the gloom, and I waved, hope surging. "Someone's coming," I said, squeezing Clara's shoulder. But as the lights drew closer, that hope curdled. The vehicle, a battered pickup, its paint chipped and rusted, moved erratically, speeding up, then slowing, its beams sweeping the road like a predator's gaze. "James," Clara whispered, her voice tight, "something's wrong." I nodded, my mouth dry. "Get the kids off the road," I said, my voice low. Clara roused Sophie and Liam, herding them toward the trees as I grabbed the backpack, my eyes locked on the approaching truck. We'd just reached the underbrush when it roared into view, screeching to a stop beside our abandoned van. Two men climbed out, their silhouettes hulking in the headlights' glow. They weren't mechanics or concerned locals, their movements were too deliberate, their postures coiled with menace. "Check inside," one barked, his voice rough as gravel. "They can't be far." My heart pounded, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown my thoughts. Liam whimpered, and I pressed a hand over his mouth, praying the men wouldn't hear. They tore through the van, their curses growing louder as they found it empty. "Spread out," the leader growled. "They're on foot." "Find 'em." Clara's eyes met mine, wide with terror but resolute. We couldn't stay here, they'd searched the woods, and with two kids, we couldn't outrun them. "We need to move," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Deeper, and she nodded, taking Sophie's hand, and we slipped into the forest, the underbrush snagging our clothes, branches clawing at our faces. The kids were quiet, sensing the danger, their small bodies trembling against ours. We moved as silently as we could, the flashlight off to avoid detection, the moon's faint glow our only guide. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, sent my nerves into overdrive, my mind racing with questions. Who were these men? Why us? Was it random, or had we stumbled into something bigger? We'd been weaving through the trees for what felt like hours when a sharp crack echoed nearby, a branch breaking under a heavy boot. I gestured for Clara to hide the kids behind a fallen log, their small forms disappearing into the shadows. I crouched behind a gnarled oak, my breath shallow, the backpack straps cutting into my shoulders. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, swinging back and forth, accompanied by heavy footsteps. "I know you're out here," a voice called, low and taunting. "Come out nice and easy, and we'll just talk." I didn't believe him, not for a second. These men weren't here for conversation. The beam swept closer, grazing the edge of my tree, and I held my breath, my body pressed into the bark. The man was close now, his silhouette looming, a rifle slung across his back. Sophie stifled a sob, and I prayed it was too soft to hear. "Got something," he muttered, his beam locking onto the log. My stomach dropped. He'd found them. I had to act. I grabbed a rock, its weight solid in my hand, and hurled it as far as I could to the left. It clattered against a stump, the sound sharp in the quiet. The man's head snapped toward it, his flashlight following. "Over there," he growled, lumbering off, his boots crunching. I rushed to Clara, my voice a desperate whisper. "We can't stay. They're fanning out." She nodded, her face pale but fierce, and we gathered the kids, moving deeper into the forest, our steps hurried but cautious. The woods seemed to close in, their shadows thicker, their silence heavier. Sophie stumbled, her small frame exhausted, and I scooped her up, her weight a reminder of what was at stake. Liam clung to Clara, his dinosaur abandoned somewhere in the dark. Just when I thought we'd collapse, a faint glow pierced the trees, not a flashlight, but the steady warmth of a building. "Look," I whispered, pointing. "A house, maybe a ranger post. We're heading there." Hope fueled us, a fragile spark that quickened our pace. The glow resolved into a small cabin, its log walls weathered but sturdy, a single light burning in the window. We broke into a run, the sounds of pursuit louder now, shouts, crashing branches. Sophie tripped, and I caught her, my arms straining as we reached the clearing. Clara pounded on the cabin door, her voice raw. "Help. Please, we need help." For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open, revealing an older woman, her hair gray and braided, a shotgun cradled in her arms. "Get in," she barked, her eyes flicking to the woods, where shadows moved in the tree line. We dove inside, the door slamming shut behind us, the bolt sliding home with a heavy thud. The cabin was warm, cluttered with books and handmade quilts, a stark contrast to the terror outside. "Who are you?" the woman demanded, her shotgun still at the ready. "What's happening?" Between gasps, we explained the van's breakdown, the men, the chase. Her face darkened, a scowl etching deeper lines. "Damn Tucker boys," she muttered. "Been terrorizing these parts for years, preying on travelers." She moved to an old CB radio on a cluttered desk, her voice steady as she called for help. "This is May Callahan at Black Oak Cabin. Got a family here, hunted by the Tucker gang. Send every deputy you've got." She turned to us, handing Clara a blanket for the kids, who huddled on a worn sofa. "You're safe for now," she said, but her eyes were wary, scanning the windows. I held my family close, Sophie's head against my chest, Liam's small hand in mine, their warmth anchoring me against the fear. As we waited, the cabin's walls seemed to pulse with the weight of our ordeal. The Tucker boys, who were they? Bandits, traffickers, or something worse? The police arrived with a blaze of sirens, their lights cutting through the dawn, and I felt my shoulders loosen, the first true breath I'd taken in hours. May's cabin had been our salvation, her shotgun and radio a lifeline. The deputies took our statements, their faces grim as they confirmed the Tuckers were known outlaws, their crimes escalating with each passing year. We survived, but the memory of that night clung to us like damp earth. Our scenic detour had become a crucible, a test of our family's strength. As we drove home in a rental car, the kids asleep in the back, I made a silent vow: no more shortcuts, no more reckless whims. Clara's hand rested on mine, her touch a quiet promise that we'd face the future together, prioritizing safety above all. The Shawnee forest receded in the rearview mirror, its shadows a reminder of the danger we'd escaped. We were alive, together, and that, I realized, was the greatest adventure we could ever ask for.